Corbyn, from Thursday until the start of December, you must stay at home.
Boris Johnson's Halloween horror show. The Prime Minister performs a stunning U-turn to place England back into lockdown.
There are no good solutions. All the solutions are bad. And what we're trying to do is have the fewest, the least bad set of solutions.
Projections of the spread of the virus show the NHS being overrun by mid-December. The lockdown from Thursday means the advice is to stay at home. The furlough scheme restarts. We are back to square one, ladies and gents. How do you feel about it? Will you comply with it? Swarbrick on Sunday starts after the news at 10.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock. Labour has accused the government of being too slow to impose a national coronavirus lockdown in England. New measures will come into force on Thursday, including the closure of pubs, restaurants, gyms and many shops. Schools and universities will remain open during the 4-week period. The Cabinet Office Minister, Michael Gove, has conceded the measures could be extended.
We will always take a decision in the national interest based on evidence, the best information we have. We want to be in a position where we can, and I believe that this is likely to be the case, have an approach where if we bring down the rate of infection sufficiently, we can reduce measures nationally and also reduce measures regionally.
The furlough scheme, which was due to end yesterday, has been extended until December. It's a greater level of support than the package offered to leaders facing regional controls in the north of England last month. Joe Anderson is the Labour Mayor of Liverpool, the first area to enter Tier 3 restrictions.
My criticism of this government is not political. It's about competence and it's about clarity and it's about consistency and all of those things are plain for people to see. And I think there is now a crisis of confidence and I think people's confidence is waning.
Scotland's First Minister has urged people to avoid all but essential travel to and from England. Ministers in Wales, which is midway through a firebreak lockdown, are expected to meet later to discuss Boris Johnson's announcement. Vaughan Gething is the Health Minister in Cardiff.
The fact that there'll be some crossover in the lockdown is not unhelpful because we'll have a period of time to get used to that before the Welsh rules are in place. But we also then need to take account of those when devising our own national settlement because we need to be able to tell the people of Wales early this week what the rules are going to be from a week Monday.
Transport for London says it's agreed a £1.8 billion bailout deal to keep running public transport until April. There won't be an extension to the congestion charge zone. Following reports, the measure was a key demand in negotiations with the government. But fares will rise and the body will have to make further savings over the next 6 months. Canadian police have made an arrest after 2 people died and 5 were injured in a knife attack in Quebec City. Officers told people to stay indoors while they looked for a suspect dressed in medieval clothing. And England have a first Rugby Union Six Nations title since 2017. They got the 34-5 bonus point win they needed in Italy. Ireland required the same outcome, but lost 35-27 away to France. And the weather, bright and mild this morning for many of us. Showers returning to Northern Ireland, Wales and England later. Some lighter rain in Scotland, a high of 16 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Just gone 10. Hello, good morning, and welcome to the show. This is Swarbrick on Sunday, live here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you very well this morning. Coming up, Labour's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury on the programme this morning to react to Boris Johnson announcing the very thing that Labour has spent weeks calling for. We'll speak to the party. We'll speak to senior NHS figures as well this morning, as once again the population seeks to protect the health service by curtailing its freedom. What does the lockdown mean for non-COVID related procedures? We'll get the details. Plus, we are live to Washington ahead of the presidential election on Tuesday. Our man Ben Kentish has, well, he's swapped one political maelstrom for another. We'll speak to him live.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. Less than a fortnight ago, the Prime Minister stood at the dispatch box and told Sir Keir Starmer that in calling for a second national lockdown, the Labour leader was looking to, quote, turn the lights out across the country. Ministers took to the airways to denounce a national lockdown as harmful. Reports even last week suggested that the Chancellor had told his colleagues that he was not going to be paying for a second national lockdown. In an interview for the Sunday Telegraph in July, the Prime Minister said that he certainly does not want another blanket shutdown and, quotes, nor do I think we will be in that position again. Well, we are, Prime Minister. What is that not that is in your stomach this morning? Is it anger? Is it fear? Is it worry? Reluctant acceptance, perhaps? Or something more rebellious? Will you be complying with the restrictions that we are going to have to live under from Thursday? 0345 6060 973 is my number. We'll speak to a member of SAGE in just a few moments. First, LBC's political editor Theo Usher joins us live to describe how it was that Boris Johnson got spooked on Halloween. Theo.
Boris Johnson bowed to the inevitable pressure yesterday from SAGE, the scientists who, of course, advise him. One model estimated 85,000 could die in a second wave of COVID-19 over Christmas, with the NHS being overwhelmed by mid-December. This as the number of cases of COVID-19 in the country hit 1 million. Now, yesterday's announcement, Tom, does not come without a political price. There is a growing movement, which we've seen, of course, in recent votes on the Conservative backbenches, pushback against greater restrictions. Desmond Swain, one of those leading backbenchers, was on LBC earlier today, and he had this warning for the Prime Minister.
It's what we found out that really is depressing and sends me to despair rather than the way it happened. I'm not in favour of a lockdown. I believe that lockdowns have one proven effect, and that's to make poor people poorer, and us all poorer, a lot poorer. People will die anyway. 1,600 people die every day, and COVID isn't anywhere near chief being amongst their killers.
Now, this lockdown starts on Thursday and runs for 27 days until December the 2nd. All pubs, bars and restaurants will shut, along with gyms and casinos. And you mentioned, of course, there was a row in the Treasury yesterday. That press conference delayed by 2.5 hours as a furlough extension was hammered out. That's going to run for the length of the lockdown. 80% of wages paid to those affected. But schools, universities will remain open. The Prime Minister, however, said that he had to act.
And let me explain why the overrunning of the NHS would be a medical and a moral disaster beyond the raw loss of life. Because the huge exponential growth in the number of patients, by no means all of them elderly, by the way, would mean that doctors and nurses would be forced to choose which patients to treat, who would get oxygen and who wouldn't, who would live and who would die.
Now, Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, said there were simply no good options on the table available to the government.
There is basically no perfect time and there are no good solutions. all the solutions are bad, and what we're trying to do is have the fewest, the least bad set of solutions at a time which you actually achieve the balance that needs to be struck between all these things that ministers have to make decisions on. And in terms of making festivities, whether it's Christmas or any other religious tradition, we would have a much better chance of doing it with these measures than we would if these measures were not being taken today. And I think let us see how this goes over the next few weeks.
Chris Whitty, of course, alluding to the fact that by taking these measures, it's hopeful, the government hopes at least, that people will be able to have something of a Christmas with people, families being able to get together. In terms of what's coming up next week, the crucial vote on Wednesday, and of course, the government's going to win that vote because Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has already said that Labour will support the government with a circuit breaker national lockdown. It remains to be seen. I think Labour will probably vote with the government, but if it doesn't and Sir Keir Starmer abstains, the vote will still pass through the House of Commons with the restrictions coming into place on Thursday.
But I guess, Theo, there will be some Conservative MPs who will vote against. Theo, thank you. LBC's political editor, Theo Usher. Joining us now is Professor Sir Mark Walport, former Chief Scientific Advisor and a member of the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, the body, of course, that is advising the Prime Minister on these matters. Thank you for coming on the programme this morning, Sir Mark. Can you be very, very clear with us? What is the stated and first aim of this lockdown?
The aim is to save lives at the end of the day. And let me be absolutely clear, it's not that it's pressure from SAGE, it's actually pressure from the data, the numbers that are available to everyone. So over 250 deaths per day at the moment, that's a quarter of the peak earlier in the year. And, all right, that sounds like a big difference, but that's actually 2 doubling times.
Okay.
And given that the rate of doubling of the infection is about between 1 and 2 weeks, so it goes from 250 to 500 to 1,000 deaths a day, potentially, in a month. There are more than 10,000 inpatients at the moment. The NHS is under great pressure. And if you look at the excess deaths this year, there's been some nonsense talked about this. There have been just over 66,000 excess deaths so far this year, and 59,000 of them have mentioned COVID as one of the contributing causes. So that's 88% of them. So
it's interesting you talk about. It's interesting you talk, Professor, about the aim of this lockdown being to save lives. Because I guess the question back is, well, how many lives are we looking to save as a result of the lockdown measures? Because you can very quickly, using that as the definition for this or the reason for this, come to the conclusion that by the end of this lockdown, the 2nd of December, not enough lives will be being saved. So we carry this on. This has already been mentioned by a government minister this morning. We could see this extended, couldn't we?
Well, that is a possibility. And the government is going to have to look at the numbers very, very carefully indeed.
So what is the measurement by which the government decides to come out? Or when will SAGE be suggesting, right, OK, we think we've saved enough lives now, or we've got the possibility of stopping R going above 1, so we're now stopping?
It's not the job of SAGE, as it were, to try and define a number. It does come back to the capacity of the virus to reproduce itself, that sort of magic R number, which is the number of people on average that get infected by a person who has the infection. And if it's greater than 1, then the epidemic is growing. And if it's less than 1, the epidemic is contracting. Now,
so we come out of lockdown at the point at which R goes below. Sorry to interrupt, Professor, but but we come out of lockdown. SAGE wants us to come out of lockdown on the basis that R is below 1. At that point, we can say, OK, let's go again.
If it's 0.99, that means it's contracting very slowly. And if you're in a part of the country that has very many cases, then let's say R is 0.9, then every 10 people infect 9 more. So every 1,000 people infect 900 more. And so it depends very much on what the background prevalence is. And as I was saying, in the first lockdown, the R number got down to about 0.5. So 100 people infecting 50. Now, the conditions for this lockdown are not as stringent as they were last time. And so it will take longer.
So how confident are you that we can get R below 1 before December the 2nd? How confident are you that R can fall below 1 with these measures in place that are quite stringent before December the 2nd?
Well, the evidence is that in some parts of the northwest and a bit of the northeast, the numbers are coming quite close to 1 on the tier 3 restrictions at the moment. But it does very much depend on people complying. And this shouldn't be viewed as some kind of punishment. It is actually protecting people, ourselves as individuals and others. It is actually about bringing the epidemic under control. And
but you're confident, are you, that these measures will bring it under control?
These measures should bring it under control.
By December the 2nd? So we can get R below 1 by December the 2nd?
Look, looking into the future is an imperfect art. It's it's unlikely to be completely controlled by then, but hopefully the numbers will be turning.
Because I worry that where we're getting to here is we are introducing a circuit breaker because we want to get R below 1. There is no guarantee that R will get below 1. And if it doesn't work, that R is above 1 by the time the 2nd of December rolls around, we use the same method to get R below 1 that hadn't previously got it below 1 in the 4 weeks that we lived under it.
Look, I think that the target is to reduce the number of infections. And if you like, the principles here are absolutely understood. In other words, this is an infection that jumps from one person to another based on their proximity. If you socially distance people, then the numbers will go down. What the policymakers are trying to do is to balance all of the other issues, the harms with loss of education, the harms with loss of jobs to the economy, mental health. And so this is, if you like, trying to get that balance right. And it's clear that the measures so far have brought the R number down to somewhere between 1 and 2. And it would be 3 or even possibly more if it was just left to run riots, as it were. And these measures should be sufficient to get it down. But is there an absolute guarantee? No. And as I say,
and that means therefore you would presumably be able to you would be seeing yourself advocating for further lockdown measures, further restrictions after December the 2nd if R is not below 1.
It's not my job to advocate for measures.
No, sorry, yes. I meant the logic of this, the reason why we're doing this means that if R isn't below 1 by December the 2nd, the measures carry on the basis that we believe these measures might work.
Well, given that policymakers do seem to believe that at the moment the loss of lives is unacceptable, that the increase in pressure on the NHS is unacceptable, and of course protecting the NHS does matter because there are all the other causes of illness that take people into the NHS, then they want to get the numbers down. That is the primary goal.
On the NHS, do you happen to know what proportion of people who contract coronavirus end up going into hospital?
It's a relatively small percentage. So we know that there were 1,400 admissions yesterday. Again, the numbers are going up very fast. And we know that there are somewhere between 50 and 100,000 infections a day. So it is a small proportion. But remember also that the infections so far earlier were predominantly in younger people, and that is now spreading to all generations. And anyone who tells you that the answer is simply to shield the elderly, that won't work because people can't be shielded in that way. Many people live in multi-generational households. Care is provided by younger people. Yeah. It won't work.
No, I understand that you're not going to agree with those who have signed the Great Barrington Declaration. But just on the NHS, we've seen from the figures on NHS admissions recently that COVID deaths peaked on April the 8th. That was 16 days after lockdown. That the infection, stop me if I get this wrong, but the infection to death time lag is about 4 weeks, which suggests that fatal infections peaked well before lockdown began. The NHS as a whole never came close to capacity. On April the 11th and 12th, the peak weekend for COVID cases in hospitals, almost 41% of general acute beds were unoccupied. And I just wonder whether you feel, or how you would persuade people that to stay at home for 4 weeks, possibly longer, to protect the NHS is needed, and that the NHS is worth protecting in that way and needs that protection when it would seem from the figures from the previous lockdown, actually they were never close to being overrun.
But there's a fundamental misunderstanding in what you've said, in that in order to keep people alive with coronavirus, it depends on intensive care beds. And those were nearly overrun. And the reality is that now the Nightingale hospitals have been developed, And there is a difference between now and earlier in the year, which is that the doubling time, the reproduction number of the virus then was 3. The doubling time was somewhere between 3 and 5 days.
So we should have the capacity now.
But the NHS, you can already see it's under great pressure. There are hospitals in the north particularly, which are under tremendous clinical pressure. And whilst you might look at the southwest and say, well, they have many fewer infections, they have a lower population, they have a lower bed capacity. And so intensive care could come under pressure very, very quickly indeed. And the corollary of that is that it means that a lot of other serious conditions which may require intensive care for quite short periods, those beds might not be available.
I don't doubt how difficult your job is, Professor. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme this morning. Professor Sir Mark Walport, former Chief Scientific Advisor, member of the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. I wonder what you make of what you've heard for the reasons for why we are being put into this lockdown on Thursday, and why it is given that 4 weeks is the period of time that we are going to be living under those conditions, but as you heard, could well be extended based on the circumstances. 0345 6060 973 is my number. Come to your calls in a few moments' time. Tom Swarbrick here, 1021.
The fight against coronavirus. For the very latest, stay with LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Very good morning to you. 10:24 is the time. Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. I hope we find you as well as can possibly be on what is how to put this delicately, a difficult weekend, I think, for this country. I wonder what you made of the justification by a SAGE member there for the lockdown that Boris Johnson announced yesterday, and a lockdown that Boris Johnson had said he didn't ever want, that he didn't think we would be in a position ever to have to do again. But, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. And I wonder to what extent there is not only a cost to people's freedoms in this, but also a cost politically, given that I think this is basically an admission that the tiered system failed, that the track and trace was not working enough to be able to manage the spread of the virus, and that we are now using the very thing that the World Health Organization said that we shouldn't be doing, which is using a lockdown as our primary weapon to tackle this thing. And a lockdown, I'm afraid, as you heard from the SAGE member there, that may well be extended if R isn't below 1. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Papers in just a moment. First, here's John in Broxbourne this morning. Hiya, John.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call.
No worries, sir.
Right, I'm not going to swear, but these muppets that are coming up with these statistics, let me reel you off a statistic for you because it's just getting my blood boiling this morning. Nearly 20% of our population is in education. They're coming home to nearly 50% of the rest of the population. So what is the purpose of having a national lockdown, putting people's livelihoods in jeopardy, shutting down small businesses, making people mass unemployment, mass redundancies, putting people that are already on the poverty line even worse into poverty for a 4-week lockdown when education is still there? The kids are still rightfully spreading the disease through schools and colleges and universities. And then what's going to happen? 4 weeks, we're going to go back to normal, and then all of a sudden the R number's going to go back up and they're going to put everyone in lockdown. I do not understand the government's thinking and rationality behind what they're doing, because we're just going to keep going on this roller coaster of up and down for how long? Until they come up with a vaccine that they may or may know might work, might not work. I'm so angry this morning. It's just
well, John. Let me read you this, and I don't want to add to your anger. We all need, my granddad would say, keep a calm souk if he was still alive. But let me read you this quote. If it succeeded, this is about a lockdown. If it succeeded, it is likely then needed to be repeated regularly. You can't have a start-stop country where businesses are closing, people are losing their jobs, then they are having to restart again. That's a quote from Robert Jenrick, a cabinet minister, just last week.
Exactly. And what's going to happen? Do we then, once we've got this mass unemployment 6 months, a year down the line, small businesses are closed down, people can't afford to put food on the table. And what then? What are the government going to then turn around and say, well, we'll eradicate debt and pay off everybody's mortgage?
John, I can hear the anger. I can hear the worry. Thank you for the call. Let's get a view on the business response to this and the possibilities that still exist, or maybe not, for small businesses, for those entrepreneurs. Baroness Helena Morrissey is a leading financier, non-executive director at St James's Place Wealth Management. Thank you very much for coming on the programme, Baroness Morrissey. Your view of the economic impact of all of this?
Well, I think it's devastating. I think it was a completely different situation, obviously, in March when we were told it was a 3-week lockdown. The furlough scheme was just starting up. And I think people and businesses could see through short-term pain for, the sake of everybody. I think now, as has been just said by John, your caller, all we know now is massive collateral damage to the economy, to people's well-being, as well as their livelihoods, other health issues that aren't being treated. And there is this sense of a sort of Alice in Wonderland, it'll be different this time. So I'm afraid I think business leaders are losing patience as well. Obviously, some sectors, aviation, hospitality, leisure, are completely decimated. And you could see 1 million jobs lost in hospitality alone over the next few months. So it's a very bleak picture. And I'm afraid there is very little to be happy about this morning.
What, in your mind, explains why the furlough scheme, which was due to end, tomorrow, has now been extended for the period of time that we're under this? What explains the reasons why furlough was going to be cut back and is now extended, even though people are going to be living under conditions where their jobs may have been severely at risk?
Well, I think it's logical if in the first instance the government said, we're going to pay 80% of wages for while there's a restriction on actually doing business. And of course, when it was more localized restrictions that had been the policy up until yesterday or until Thursday, then, they were saying, well, there's less impact on businesses. I mean, it was still, we obviously had the whole Greater Manchester argument about whether businesses and people were being overly penalised there. So I think this is one of the logical things, but obviously it's not affordable indefinitely. And as far as I'm concerned, it's good news that people will obviously not be unemployed so quickly, but still there's a huge risk. We're just kicking the can down the road businesses have other costs besides the people side of it. And I think, we need a strategy here. We need to have, we need to see the whole picture as well, the impact on the economy and other health issues. So Mark earlier talked about the evidence, but where is the evidence about, the checks and balances that's going on in this decision making?
You talk about businesses losing patience, just finally. I wonder what you think that might manifest itself as. What does businesses losing patience look like?
Well, I think at the moment it's been disappointing that many business leaders haven't spoken up about this. I think they've been afraid of being on the wrong side. Obviously, no one wants to belittle a virus that kills people. However, I think we're now in a sort of existential moment, a threat to many businesses. And I would hope that there will be more vocal exposition of frustrations, more attempt to try to contribute to the government's strategy, and more attempt to let some balance into the conversation.
So that some businesses deemed non-essential could perhaps open gently, very carefully throughout even a national lockdown. That's what you think people should be pushing for?
Well, I think so. I think at the moment we've got this sledgehammer to sort of kill a fly strategy, and it's not going to work. I think we've already seen in Wales, obviously, the argument over what's non-essential. It would make a lot of difference to small businesses if there was a relaxing around certain treatments and dentists and things that people just rely on. So, I just hope that we get a more nuanced approach. It's not what's happening at present, and we'll need to keep talking about it and make sure that everybody gets their voices heard.
Good to speak to you, Baroness Morrissey, Helena Morrissey, leading financier, non-executive director at St James's Place Wealth Management. Thank you for coming on the programme this morning. 0345 6060 973. I want to get your voices on. I want to understand whether or not you are feeling perhaps actually happy that the measures are finally being brought in. If this is something that you have wanted to see for some time, you felt that it's been getting out of control. Why on earth did they wait until now to bring these measures in? That you feel a bit more secure, perhaps, at the idea that these lockdown measures are going to be brought in, that it's going to add to your safety. I guess if you work or run a non-essential business, then the next 4 weeks are, well, you tell me. We'll come to your calls in just a few moments' time. We'll get the papers too. We'll speak to Labour as well. Tom Swarbrick here, Swarbrick on Sunday, 10:32. News headlines. Here's your Thomas Watts.
The Cabinet Office Minister, Michael Gove, has admitted the 4-week national lockdown could be extended beyond December. People in England are preparing for the 4-week closure of hospitality businesses and many shops from Thursday. Schools, colleges and universities will remain open during the period of restrictions. Teaching unions say classrooms are a major contributor to the spread of infection and should shut too. Transport for London has secured a bailout from the government worth around £1.8 billion. The funding to make up income lost during the pandemic is not conditional on an extension of the congestion charge zone. And the weather, a bright and mild morning for many. Showers returning to much of Northern Ireland, Wales and England later. Lighter rain in Scotland, a high of 16 Celsius.
The fight against coronavirus. For the very latest, stay with LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday, with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
Morning to you. Here's Russell on 84850. I will not be complying with the lockdown. Lockdown the over 60s. We should use the money we'd lose because of a lockdown on helping the vulnerable shield and paying them to stay inside. Why are the rest of us having to suffer? This is ludicrous, he says. Meanwhile, another Tom suggests, when will people get it? The COVID virus simply needs a close, warm human host to replicate. Children and young adults are ideal. They don't readily die out. They don't listen to sensible advice and avidly seek close association with others. So schools and universities will be left open this time. A concern that if you're going to lock down, you might as well close the schools as well. Let's come to the papers this morning. The Observer. Johnson's U-turn puts country under tough new lockdown. Pubs and cafes shut. Weddings banned. PM says local reviews after a 4-week period. Over at lbc.co.uk, lbc.co.uk, England prepares for a second national lockdown lasting until December. Well, so far. The Sunday Telegraph, 4-week lockdown to save NHS as millions face return to furlough. Stay at home unless you have to go to work. Don't meet other households. On the front page of the Sunday Times, fears of medical disaster force the Prime Minister into a new lockdown. 27-day shutdown as cases hit 1 million. Over at the Mail on Sunday, lockdown sparks Tory civil war. Cabinet fury at being kept in the dark. MPs vow to rebel in the Commons leak probe into Matt Hancock. It seems the Health Secretary being the first to be targeted by this leak probe that seeks to work out what on earth was going on that led to this story, this announcement being front page of the Times yesterday. Coronavirus crisis, shockdown, lockdown too late and will cost lives, say experts. That's on the front of the Sunday Mirror. Sunday Express, lockdown 2 to avoid disaster. PM's last-ditch plea to save the NHS and Christmas. And over at the Sunday People, lockdown nightmare, Halloween horror as UK faces months of hell. Their pictures, Sean Connery, James Bond, who died yesterday at the age of 90. Let me read you this from the Telegraph leader. They say it is an absolute humiliation for supposedly successful countries such as the UK and France to have to admit it, but the bureaucracy can still only find one tool it thinks will make a real difference. The biggest, bluntest instrument of all, another dreadful lockdown. Let's speak to Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury and Labour MP for Sunderland South. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning. Do you agree that this is a dreadful tool to have to use?
It is sadly necessary. I mean, Labour had called for a circuit breaker over 3 weeks ago that would have been a short, sharp lockdown. Instead, because the government have been slow to act, we are now facing a much longer lockdown. That will, of course, come with it significant costs both to the economy and to public health too. We think the government have been too slow on this. They were too slow back in March and they're too slow now, but we will be supporting the government in bringing forward these measures because you only need to look at the infection rate, at the hospitalisations and sadly the number of deaths that we're seeing to recognise that we absolutely must act now.
Problem is that as a member of SAGE has told us this morning, they can't guarantee, and neither could the Labour Party guarantee, that whatever length of lockdown you put in, that R will get below 1.
Well, we have to use this time to fix, test, trace and isolate, something that the government have not done for many months. Giving that power to local health teams to manage contact tracing. We're not doing very well at this in England. They're doing a much better system and it's working much more effectively in Wales where it is done at a local level. So there is much that the government should be doing during the period of this national lockdown to limit the length of time it will endure, because we also heard from Michael Gove this morning that they can't guarantee that the lockdown will end at the start of December as they anticipate, which is why it's absolutely essential that we do fix that system, because until we get to that point, it will be too difficult to control the transmission of the virus. But not just that, it will have an impact on the economy too, because we won't see a recovery until we get to grips with the virus.
But just to be really clear about this, about what we're doing this for, because as you say, you talk about the test and trace system, which does need to get up and running, but of course becomes less effective as case numbers rise broadly. It's harder to catch up with them. Are you saying that Labour will back the government in coming out of lockdown once R is below 1, or that test trace is fixed to a point where you think it would work?
So we want the R number under 1, but we also want test, trace and isolate fixed. Yeah. When we look back to the point at which we started to ease restrictions, that it was necessary to have an effective system up and running then. I saw in my own community what happened when infections started to rise, but we didn't have effective contact tracing in place. And that made it far more difficult than it should have been to get a grip on the virus. And now what we face, of course, is lots of businesses deeply worried about what the future will hold. We've had the Chancellor having to unravel and put back in place support that he decided to pull away far too soon. I appreciate that there are costs of acting, but there are also significant costs of inaction too, and the government should have acted sooner. The impact will be more severe because of that failure to act earlier.
So until R comes below 1, Labour will support the government in locking down?
We will, as always, we will keep the evidence under review. But of course, we don't have access to the same level of information and data.
Why would you need to if the Labour Party position had been for some weeks that you wanted to lock down to get R below 1?
Because we do also have to consider the impact on the NHS too, and whether it's in a position to cope.
So are you going to hold the government to that December deadline and say beyond December the 2nd, Labour will not support a further lockdown?
We want it to work, of course we want it to work, but what's essential is that the government uses this time wisely, both in terms of managing the ability of the NHS to cope, to further roll out testing, and to make sure that we've got an effective test, trace and isolate system. But we don't have access to the same level of data and information and scientists.
The R numbers published.
It is, but there is a lag in the publication, for example, of SAGE minutes. But when we saw that SAGE had called for a circuit breaker, Keir Starmer immediately called for the government to act and to put that in place, which they ridiculed. The Chancellor ridiculed it, the Prime Minister ridiculed it, and now here we are facing a month-long lockdown stretching potentially beyond the start of December because the government hadn't acted sooner. We think that's a mistake, but we want to work with the government to get this right. It is essential that we bring down the infection rate, that we reduce the number of cases, and we'll act in the national interest to make sure that happens.
On a separate story, which of course dominated the headlines earlier this week, but then a week is a very, very long time in politics at the moment. What specific Labour Party rule did Jeremy Corbyn break to mean that he was suspended from the party?
Jeremy Corbyn's statement following the publication of the EHRC report was deeply disappointing. I wasn't involved in that decision or that process. That is as it should be. Politicians shouldn't be involved, and that was one of the criticisms that the EHRC levelled at the party, that there was political interference in decision-making.
There are lots of statements that could be seen as disappointing. That is a very, very subjective call. There's no rule in the Labour Party that says that you're suspended if we don't like a statement that you make, is there?
I'm not aware of the circumstances of that suspension or what has been issued to Jeremy Corbyn in terms of setting out the reasons for that. That is exactly as it should be. It is a matter between Jeremy Corbyn and for the Labour Party now to resolve.
Bridget Phillipson, grateful for your time. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Labour MP for Sunderland South. Very good to have you on the programme this morning. Let's speak to Tim in Derby. Hi there, Tim.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on.
How's that not in your stomach this morning, all of this?
Terrible. 10 years as a Tory supporter, 5 years backing Boris for Prime Minister, and he's an absolute charlatan. He's got no idea what he's doing. Just changes one day to the next. There's absolutely no support for small business. Lost my job through coronavirus. Can't get any sort of business support to start anything up. Try and believe in the Tory ethos and manifesto of do it yourself, build your own business, get started. The government will back you. No business support. Lock the country back down, not even have the Chancellor on to explain anything. No support for self-employed people explained as we go back into lockdown. They throw around this term of non-essential business. Well, what's essential? You leave the kids going to school. I run a sweets and confectionery store. That's the majority of my target audience as customers. Am I allowed to open? Can I open on click and collect? Can I serve things through the window? Can I deliver? There is absolutely no guidance for what to do.
Well, there is a lengthy document that is published on gov.uk which may help you out, Tim, which explains some of the rules. I have to say, is it? Okay. Well, one of the things I found remarkable about yesterday's press conference was not only the delays in it, which I think goes to, as Theo was telling us earlier, some way to showing actually quite publicly that there were a lot of people in the cabinet that needed to be squared away before that press conference actually happened about this decision. But Boris Johnson was at pains to point out that this lockdown is different from the last one because he still wants people to go to school and he still wants people to use the NHS. Those are the big differences between this lockdown and the last lockdown. And yet almost in the next sentence repeated the slogan from the first one: stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives.
Exactly.
And it goes to your point, Tim, about confusion here.
But there's no incentive for this lockdown. If you're still going to allow the kids to go to school, as your caller earlier said, you've got the best possible breeding ground for a disease like this. 1,500 kids going into every secondary school who are coming from all different households. Mum and dad told that they can't go to work necessarily, might lose the job, might go on furlough, have to take up jobs in retail, manufacturing, care, all the industries that work round the clock. So their hours are going to be all over the place. Where do the kids go? Oh, you're allowed childcare from Nana and Grandad. So they go to Nana and Grandad, so you're a part of the vulnerable population. Spread the disease to them.
It's
counterintuitive, if anything.
I see that point. I completely understand it, that it feels like it's, if you're going to lockdown schools. But the Prime Minister, thank you for your call, by the way, and I'm so sorry that it's so tough for you. The Prime Minister talked about a medical and a moral dilemma. And I do think there is a moral dilemma in saying to children that they can't go to school for a 4-week period or possibly longer. Let's face it, possibly longer if R isn't below 1. I think that is a massive moral issue. And I think on that, I would agree that schools need to stay open. They absolutely have to stay open. Tim, thank you. 0345 6060 973. More of your calls in just a moment. 10:47.
This is LBC.
No, not you. Not you. Don't be rude.
He's been the most divisive president in a generation.
Build that wall. Build that wall.
Prince Charles, so good, so good.
COVID, COVID. COVID, 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 COVID. COVID!
So will it be 4 more years of President Trump?
I think we will make a deal with China. 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 Also North Korea. Rocket Man should have been handled a long time ago. Little Rocket Man. Nobody has done more for the black community than Donald Trump.
Donald Trump needs to stop caring about how he looks.
You're the
worst president America has ever had.
This Tuesday evening from 10, America Decides.
Join Ian Dale and me, Sheila Fogarty, live from Westminster as we follow the final moments of the campaign and deal with the fallout of the results.
Will Joe Biden have done enough to take the presidency, or is it 4 more years for Donald Trump? We'll have the best insight and analysis throughout the night.
Then as the results come through, join me for a Nick Ferrari at Breakfast US election special from 5.
Tuesday evening from 10, America Decides on LBC. is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Morning to you. We'll hear from Sir Keir Starmer after the news at 11 o'clock. We'll also talk too about the impact of the lockdown on the travel industry, on education, and also for the publican too. As you know, if you listen to my late night show, Mondays to Thursdays, 10 p.m, we are the unofficial home of the publican. We'll get some reaction from the pub trade after the news at 11 o'clock. Lucy's in Manchester this morning. Hi, Lucy.
Hi.
Hi, your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I work for the test and trace service, so I get to see what's kind of going on behind the scenes. And if anyone thinks, there was a couple of calls before saying we need time for test and trace to get its act together. If anyone thinks that's going to happen in 4 weeks, they are sorely mistaken. We've got a system that is just a complete shambles. I worry every day when I have to make all these calls, and we're now getting people with mental health issues, people telling us they can't continue like this, they've lost jobs, they're not earning any money, they can't claim the benefits that the government are trying to hand out that most people can't even claim for unless they're already on benefits.
In what way is it a shambles, Lucy? In what way is it a shambles?
The app doesn't talk to the system that we're using. So the app gives different dates to the dates that we're telling people.
Oh, God.
We're calling people, telling them they're a contact, but actually they've tested positive because they've got so many accounts open. It's just, I can't even explain how depressing it is.
How many calls do you make a day, roughly?
At the moment, around 100.
And what is the view of the majority of them when it comes to taking up your instruction to self-isolate?
Most of them are okay about it, but I just wonder whether they're just saying yes, 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 and then doing what they like anyway. Which, to some extent, I can understand, because if they're self-employed or something like that, and then suddenly they're being asked to isolate for 2 weeks.
Yeah. And when it comes to different parts of the system... Yeah, when it comes to different parts of the system talking to one another and giving accurate information, you talk about the app speaking to the central system. What needs to change in the next 4 weeks in order to get this somewhere near to functioning, Lucy?
I honestly don't know. I always feel like we need to start all over again. That's kind of how I'm feeling about it. I know. And this is why I get so despair at hearing your call and say, it's just 4 weeks. This will never be just 4 weeks. This will have to be extended and extended, because I just don't see how we can get this under control when we're
Prime Minister coming on, and every time the Prime Minister, it's put to the Prime Minister that the percentage of contacts traced is dropping, that the percentage of tests turned around in 24 hours is now at its lowest level during this pandemic. He says, I'm not going to take aim at those hardworking people like yourself, Lucy, who are doing a great job in trying to get this up and running. From the standing start that they had, actually to get it up to this point is a really, really good effort, and we will keep going with it. What's your view of that?
I just think they're deluded, and they probably need to spend 8 hours calling people and then see what they think about the system. Because, most people don't even bother answering the phone anymore. We're calling them so many times that they're disconnecting from the service, they're blocking our number. Because not only do we call them at the beginning, but we're now calling them on days 4, 7, 10 and 13, sometimes 4 times a day. Sometimes if it's a family of 4, and they've got one contact number, that means we're calling each person up to 4 times a day in that household. It's so people are just disconnecting with it, and I just think I just don't have any trust now in the government, and I do despair of the whole thing.
Well, do you know what, Lucy? I think everybody this morning is feeling it, to be honest with you. And I think that issue of compliance is a massive one now, because at the last one, I think the majority of people were absolutely understanding of the fact that we didn't know about this. The safest thing to do is just let's call time on everything for a bit until we work out what's going on. We now know a bit more about what is required in order to keep our society open and moving to a greater extent than being locked down, and it's not working, is it? Let's go to Jamie, who's in Kings Lynn, new caller to the programme. Hi there, Jamie.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad.
Jolly good.
Cracking on.
Yeah, I'm cracking on. Well, that's the best way. What else can we do? Okay, my point is probably the epicentre of my point is my ire at the ambiguity shown by the government over this whole crisis. There doesn't seem to be anybody able to get a grip. And listening to your last caller just really encapsulated that in a very tangible sense. She deals with it every day. It's just kind of ridiculous. And there seems to be a never-ending line of politicians willy-waving and party politics. Surely this is the time, if ever there was a time in our lifetime, to get together and never mind about politics, party politics, cross-party negotiation and analysis, discussion. Let's get to grips with it as best we can, not just clutch at straws.
No, I get that politics has really roared to the centre of coronavirus in the last few weeks. But doesn't it just show the fact that people have different opinions about what to do based on the same evidence?
Well, if they're given
I'm not sure you're
the
going to
same
change
evidence.
that.
Well, okay, yeah, but you know as well as I do, the evidence that the politicians are presented with is not necessarily the evidence that we have. There is always going to be something held back, whether it be timeframes of clinical trials for drugs, whether it be for timeframes of lockdown. Of course, we all know behind the scenes the civil services are rallying around doing what they can to try and implement government ideas.
Well, and do you know what, Jamie? It does go to the point that was made in the Telegraph, Sunday Telegraph leader, about how bad this is for Western governments across the piece, actually. That the only thing that the state has, it's seemingly, to respond to this is a blunt tool like a national lockdown. Thank you for the call. On the political point, let me just read you this. One Conservative MP of his own government, shambolic, rudderless ramblings, constituents getting in touch, furious or in tears, grim, grim, grim. We'll hear from Sir Keir Starmer after the news at 11.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock, a former chief scientific advisor has told LBC England's coronavirus lockdown could last longer than the 2nd of December. Hospitality businesses and non-essential retailers are due to close for 4 weeks from Thursday. Schools, colleges and universities will remain open. Sir Mark Walport, also a member of the SAGE Advisory Committee, has been speaking to Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC.
These measures should bring it under control. Looking into the future is an imperfect art. It's unlikely to be completely controlled by then, but hopefully the numbers will be turning.
The Prime Minister's facing criticism from figures both in favour and opposed to the new restrictions. The former Conservative leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, has accused Boris Johnson of giving in to the scientific advisers. Labour says the decision should have been taken weeks ago. Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, has told Swarbrick on Sunday there will be a human cost to the delay.
When we saw that SAGE had called for a circuit breaker, Keir Starmer immediately called for the government to act and to put that in place, which they ridiculed. The Chancellor ridiculed it, the Prime Minister ridiculed it, and now here we are facing a month-long lockdown stretching potentially beyond the start of December because the government hadn't acted sooner.
Furlough payments are to be extended at 80% for the duration of the second lockdown. The job support scheme had been due to end yesterday. Sarah Wilkinson runs a beauty salon in West Yorkshire and says she's only just recovering from the first lockdown.
It's now a tireless job trying to keep my business afloat, juggle everything, whilst also keeping my own mental health, general health and momentum going. I'm absolutely exhausted.
Ministers in Wales are expected to meet later to discuss the announcement in England. The 17-day firebreak lockdown in Wales is due to end a week tomorrow. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has urged people to avoid all but essential travel to and from England. In other news, a 19-year-old man's been stabbed to death during a fight in West London. He was pronounced dead in West Kilburn last night. A man is being questioned on suspicion of murder. The government's agreed a deal worth £1.8 billion to bail out Transport for London. TfL's finances have taken a severe hit from the collapse in fare revenue during the pandemic. There won't be an extension of the congestion charge zone, following reports that was among ministers' demands in negotiations. And the weather, a bright and mild morning for many. Showers returning to much of Northern Ireland, Wales and England later. Lighter rain in Scotland, a high of 16 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Thomas Watts.
is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Very good morning to you. Just gone 11 o'clock. You're listening to Swarbrick on Sunday here on LBC. I'm Tom Swarbrick. Hope we find you as well as can possibly be this Sunday morning, where if you've been living under a rock, you won't be aware of the news that broke yesterday that England is going into another full national lockdown from Thursday for 27 days until the 2nd of December. The Sunday Times fears of medical disaster force the Prime Minister into a new lockdown, 27-day shutdown as cases hit 1 million. The suggestion from Sage is that unchecked, the NHS could be overrun by the middle of December. That is what has made the Prime Minister, completely U-turn, to suggest that now a national lockdown is necessary. I want to come to your thoughts. If you run a business that is going to be put under these measures, you are deemed non-essential. How are you going to be able to survive? Worth noting, too, that the furlough scheme is going to be back up and running at 80%. You are, and I want to check this later on during the show, you are going to be able to apply for more further help with your mortgage. If you require help with it. The mortgage holiday scheme has also been extended, meaning that borrowers who have been affected by coronavirus and have not yet used the scheme will be entitled to 6-month holiday. Those already using the scheme will be able to top up to 6 months without it being recorded on their credit file. I hope that is some help to people. We'll speak to the World Health Organization in a few moments' time. We'll also talk about the impact of lockdown on pubs, on travel, given that outbound flights seem to have been banned as well. I want to hear first, though, this morning from Sir Keir Starmer, who's been speaking to LBC. He has expressed his contempt in the government's delay in locking down. Take a listen.
Well, it's regrettable that the government has left it this late to bring in a lockdown. We called for a circuit break 3 weeks ago. The government rejected it, ridiculed it, only now to do the self-same thing. That means, I'm afraid, that the lockdown will be for longer because the infection rate has gone up in the last 3 weeks and we've missed the opportunity of half term when schools would actually have been shut. So what we now need to see from the government is the infection rate coming down to below 1, because otherwise the infections will keep going up. We also need to see the government using this period to fix, test, trace and isolate, because if you can't test quickly, you can't trace. If you can't trace, you can't isolate, and you will lose control of the virus, which is what has happened. So fix, test, trace and isolate. We've been promised a world-beating system for months on end. We don't need world-beating, we need effective, and we haven't got it.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking to LBC a little earlier this morning. He's also backed the decision to keep schools open for now. Let's get some reaction to that. Dr. Joe Grady is General Secretary of the University and College Union. Thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning, Dr. Grady. Do you think it's right that schools are kept open during this?
I think this is an incredibly difficult situation. I think that what we saw last night from Valance and Whitty during the press briefing, is that this virus is moving around young people and is being passed up through the generations. So I think it's completely understandable why teaching professionals are saying that we should lock down schools whilst the rest of the population in England has a lockdown.
The National Education Union suggests that some 20,000 of their members, or close to 20,000 of their members, are saying that they want to lock down and they're advocating for schools to be shut. Does that not add to the misery that already exists by keeping children off school for an as yet undefined period of time? The government and scientists saying that this could go on beyond the 2nd of December.
I think it's a really difficult call to make. I think what I would probably say, though, is, and the many scientists that have shown that in different parts of the world, a proper functioning track and trace system can mean that we don't have to keep yo-yoing in and out of isolation. Yep. And I think the real concern of the NEU, and it's our concern for colleges and universities, is that a half-measured lockdown won't produce the results that we need and might sow the seeds of a further one in January or February, which will be far worse for our children.
Are you surprised then that the Labour Party has not called on schools to be shut, given that that was part of their circuit breaker? They said do it over half term when schools would be closed.
I have no idea why the Labour Party would make that decision. It does seem to me to be supporting somewhat of a half-measured lockdown.
So the Labour Party is ignoring the unions and the concerns of the teachers and in those schools.
I mean, they're supporting the current stance of the government. Whether that means they're ignoring the NEU, I think, is slightly different.
Well, the NEU are saying that they'd like to shut schools.
Yeah, but ignoring suggests that they somehow are dismissing their concerns, and having not been.
Well, they are for now, aren't they? They're not suggesting that schools should be closed.
Well, yeah, but I mean, maybe we're just quibbling over words, but I'm not sure I would say that means someone's being ignored.
What would you say then to parents who might be looking at, yet again, another extended period without end of having their children at home and not in the classroom and unable to get the education that they need?
I genuinely think we need to think longer term about this. I can't imagine what this must be like for parents. But not doing this properly now means we might be doing it again. Other countries have demonstrated it does not have to be this way. I don't want another period of a month's worth of working from home, not being able to do anything. I'm sure other people don't. But if we don't do this right, and if the month that we spend in this lockdown isn't spent getting a proper track, trace, and isolate system up and running, we will be doing this again at some point.
Dr. Joe Grady, grateful for your time. You're General Secretary of the University and College Union. 9 minutes past 11. Peter Borg-Neal joins us. He is Executive Chairman of Oakman Inns, to get some thoughts on what all this means for the ailing hospitality sector, which is going to have to shut again, I'm afraid, from Thursday. Peter, thank you for being there for us. I wonder how this is going to damage your industry.
Well, good morning, Tim. It's obviously an absolute disaster for us. We're incredibly frustrated that the government don't be able to kind of stick to a single strategy. At the beginning they talked about lockdown to
Peter, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to get your line sorted, because to be honest, I'm struggling to hear you. And if I'm struggling to hear you in a quiet studio, then there'll be people out about in their cars and in the kitchen with the kids running around that might struggle to hear you too. So let's try and get your line sorted out, and we'll come back to you. Peter Borg-Neal, Executive Chairman of Oakman Inns. Let's speak to Tim Jeans, Chair of Cornwall Airport, former Managing Director of Monarch Airlines. Again, Mr. Jeans, thank you for coming on. Again, this lockdown is going to massively affect air travel. I wonder what you make of what you've heard thus far from the government.
Well, the air transport industry has already been effectively decimated by the pandemic and by the measures that have had to be put in place to try and control it. The latest lockdown will simply add not only to the uncertainty for the industry, but also, more importantly, for passengers and people who might have wanted to travel. But unfortunately, that's the nature of the world we live in at the moment. That the industry is going to, I wouldn't say collapse, but it's certainly going to take a lot longer now to emerge from this crisis than might have been the case even 3 days ago.
Are you able to clarify for my listeners what the rules now are on air travel from Thursday?
Well, there's been no specific guidance put out, but I think it's fair to say that particularly those people who booked holidays from Thursday will be unlikely to be able to travel on them, because effectively they are now forbidden from leaving their homes, from their areas. I don't know yet, and we don't know yet, whether airlines will cancel flights as a result of the new lockdown, but I think it's very unlikely that people will be able to travel from Thursday as they plan.
What does that mean for an airport like Cornwall's airport, and in a part of the country where you have, comparatively with the Northwest or with the Midlands, in fact with pretty much everywhere else, very few cases?
Well, that's right, but of course Cornwall is a huge destination market for air travel. So many of our passengers will be arriving in Cornwall, mostly for leisure, but also some on business. Already we've seen, for example, our link to London. That was operating every day with British Airways. That from this coming week will now reduce to just 2 flights a week. There will be days in November now when the airport has no flights, simply because the airlines that were intending to operate have now chosen to cancel flights. So for example, we're losing our Ryanair flight to Spain, which was operating weekly, is now not going to operate. So it's going to have a material effect, not just on the airport, but obviously on the jobs that the airport supports.
Yeah, I see that there's a suggestion from the local council that Newquay Airport may no longer be financially viable. I wonder if you have the same concern about the airport you chair.
Yes, absolutely. The airport was growing very, I wouldn't say rapidly, but it was certainly growing very nicely until the end of last year. Then our largest airline customer, Flybe, collapsed just about 3 weeks ahead of the pandemic. And now it's going to run at a very substantial loss for at least the next 2 years. Now, we have got Cornwall Council's support to keep the airport open. But of course, we, like many, not just small, but many regional and indeed national airports, they're businesses which were nicely profitable and able to support the jobs and the economies in the region now no longer are so. And we, as an airport and as an aviation industry, are desperately calling upon government to create a framework where we can get some support just to allow us to keep going and to serve the communities and regions we operate in.
Well, I do hope that you get, certainly your local MPs will be making representations to the Treasury to try and get the help that you need. Tim Jeans, thank you for your time. Chair of Cornwall Airport, former Managing Director of Monarch Airlines. Let's try again with Mr. Borge Neal, Executive Chairman of Oakman Inns. Peter, thank you for bearing with us. You were saying that this is catastrophic for the pub trade.
Yeah, it's obviously helpful that the furlough scheme has been reintroduced. But you have to remember, people still have rent to pay. There's still a whole load of other bills. So people will now be burning cash. It takes away confidence in the future. And, you know, the government seem to think we're an industry that could be switched on and off. And I don't think it works that way. And it won't just be us. You know, it's our supply chain. It's builders, furniture makers, plumbers, you know, a whole host of people, artists, you know, musicians who supply into us. And, you know, this is going to have huge economic impact.
Yeah, talk to me about the supply chain element of this, because I think that's sort of under-discussed, actually. The breweries and the people who come to the pubs to perhaps play music or whatever, how are you having to cancel them? You're having to tell them, sorry, this isn't going to happen now. And what support do they have?
Yeah, I mean, clearly in terms of brewers and farmers and fruit and veg men, yeah, we just won't be buying their stuff, which is a massive problem for them. You know, musicians have had a terrible year. But you know, the people who would build new pubs, none of these projects are going to happen because there's too much uncertainty. I've got 4 shelves waiting to be developed, and I just can't do it. A, because we haven't got the money, but B, we just haven't got the confidence to think that we can even get the job done.
Can you be, though, with the furlough scheme in place, can you be sort of, as an industry, frozen, as it were? People get the money coming in through the door, even if they're not working, and then restart once we come out of lockdown, hopefully on the 2nd of December, but you never know.
Well, we can. My company will be able to. You do need a bit of a run-in, so we need some certainty. You need to order the stuff. You need to get your team back. You need to check everything's working correctly. But, you know, but the debts will be racking up for many people. You know, the rent, you know, being the key one, will be just building all the time. And it all seems so unnecessary. I mean, they seem to be trying to blame hospitality, but the facts are that when we reopened back in 4th of July, I think the rolling 7-day average of deaths is 47. You roll forward 30 days, which is they talk about being the period of from infection to death, and it's fallen to, I've got the number here, 13. You go forward another 4 weeks, that's 4 weeks after Eat Out to Help Out started, it was down to 7. Then the universities reopen and it shoots up. And yet, you know, the government want to kind of point the finger at us. Last time it was care home hospitals, you know, there's just no strategy, there's no thinking.
Yes, and there's some ONS data to back up the idea that transmissions that happen within hospitality sectors are very, very low. Just finally, I note that supermarkets can do takeaway booze, but pubs can't, but can do takeaway food. Can you survive on just doing takeaway food? And what is the logic behind saying, well, supermarkets you can buy booze, but not at pubs to take away?
Well, there's no logic. I don't know whether they've come up with some bizarre theory that means it's more dangerous to serve booze from a pub or restaurant than from a supermarket. It's clearly absurd, or we can only hope it's just a mistake, because we see so many of them. There's total, lack of attention to detail. So I'm hoping it's just not right. But at the moment, that's what the papers, the government papers say.
Peter Borge-Neal, I'm grateful to you. Thank you. Executive Chairman of Oakman Inns. I want to get your views on what you've heard there this morning, both from the teachers, from the travel industry, from the pub trade, and I guess whether or not you think it is right that at the moment the Labour Party is backing the government in not shutting the schools. If you work in a school, are you happy at being kept open over the period of the lockdown that's going to be in place? 0345 6060 973, and I'm very keen to hear from you about the political implications of some of this. You heard Mr. Borge-Neal there sort of railing against the lack of strategy here. There are Conservative ministers saying that this cannot go on, that this is a total shambles. I see one anonymously quoted Conservative minister suggesting that the Prime Minister is on borrowed time. 0345 6060 973. We'll speak to the World Health Organization in a few moments as well. Tom Swarbrick here. It's 11:19.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
We'll speak to the World Health Organization in just a moment. First, a text on 84850. I'm a teacher, Tom. I'm glad schools are staying open. Children need the routine for their mental health. However, I have concerns because this virus does spread in schools. Public Health England closed some of our bubbles last half term. If parents are working, where do children go after school? It could easily spread across local communities if there is an outbreak in one. Let's speak to Rebecca, who's in Swindon this morning. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hi, you want to tell me about the NHS?
Yeah, I work on a respiratory ward that's turned into a COVID ward, basically. And I think people are forgetting about the pressure on the NHS. It's all about the businesses and the schools. But during the pandemic, I've seen so many people suffer with COVID. And it's like that's all being forgotten, really. I've got a little boy who goes to school, and if he doesn't go to school, he then has to go to his grandma who's shielding, who's high risk.
Yeah.
So,
Rebecca, are you seeing numbers coming in through your doors akin to the numbers that were coming in during March and April?
Not as many, no. So during March, April, our whole ward was COVID. Since then, we've split into two, half a COVID end, half a respiratory end. And say 2-3 weeks ago, we had maybe one confirmed and a few suspected. Now we've got 20 beds of positive patients and 20 patients of respiratory patients. Our nurses aren't having breaks already because they're so stretched with the COVID patients. You know, the ICU's filling up. They've had to make a second ICU in theatres. It's just, yeah.
I wonder, Rebecca, to what extent do you say this is because people are spreading the virus around, they're not abiding by the rules, or the rules aren't working and it's the virus that's causing this? Or
well, I think
to what extent you think actually we knew that this was a possibility? We'd spent 7 weeks trying to build up NHS capacity to be able to deal with this. Are you surprised that you don't have enough capacity to deal with the early stages of this second wave?
Well, the thing is we struggle with the winter pressure as it is. Everybody knows that. And we are starting to get that winter pressure already. And we struggle to have the bed capacity just for that alone. So, my ward has tried to make an extra 6 beds. But half of that ward's took with COVID patients that we didn't have last year.
Well, listen, Rebecca, thank you for what you're doing, and I'm sorry that it's seemingly going to get more difficult. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Let's speak to Jen, who's in Romford. Hiya, Jen.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I've just been having a listen on my way back from Tesco, which was madness, which is nice to know. That's already starting. I'm a primary school teacher. I also have a 5-year-old daughter that's obviously in school, and I am very much for schools staying open. For a number of reasons. I work in a really big school. We've got about 3,000 children. It's a primary school. Since September, we've only been aware of 3 positive cases in our school amongst 3,000 children, which for me has just made me feel very safe. I have felt safe the whole time. I think the children feel safe. I haven't felt at risk since going back to school. I'm very happy to be there. I feel like we're putting the right things in place. We have our windows and doors open. We stay away from each other. I feel very safe.
Do you know what, Jen? Can I say on a what is a particularly dark and grim morning, you have become the bright light in that. It is, I can't tell you how nice it is, and maybe it's a view not shared by some of your colleagues, but it is nice at least to hear that there is a teacher who is teaching, who has children going to school, who thinks, do you know what, we've got to get on, we've got to keep kids at school.
And I'm not the only one, there are an odd number of teachers that maybe will resist this, but generally amongst the people that I work with, we were having conversations before half term saying we really hope that we just get to come in and crack on and get on with the learning. And, as obviously it's their education, but they're so happy. And my daughter is so happy to go to school. She looks forward to it.
I think our children are the same age. I've got a 5-year-old as well. And for him, not just for his education, but his socialising, for his well-being, being in school is absolutely the right thing. Jen, thank you so much for your call. I'll let you put that Tesco shopping away. 11:27, let's speak to Dr. Margaret Harris, spokesperson for the World Health Organization, joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you for being there, Dr. Harris. Your view of the measures that the government has implemented?
Good morning. And I'd just like to say I add the bright moment that you mentioned with your previous speaker, not so much that she's teaching, but she's teaching in a COVID-safe way. They're opening the windows, they're paying attention, they're learning to live in the new world we're in to keep these infections away.
Okay.
The new measures, this is what's happening in a lot of different European countries because the acceleration has been so intense. What we saw last week really was a big rise week on week, 30% new cases, and the really telling thing, 40% more deaths. And this is why countries have moved very quickly to very stringent measures because they are really trying to prevent the overloading of the health system and the increase in deaths.
So on that point, broadly speaking, what is the World Health Organization's view of mortality? And what is the World Health Organization's understanding of the proportion of people who get coronavirus going into hospitals?
So it does vary from place to place, but one of the tricky things about this coronavirus is that most people don't get the severe illness that requires hospitalisation.
Mm-hmm.
So most people think, what's the big deal? A lot of people, we're seeing between 30% and 50%, depending on the country, have an asymptomatic infection. But if you have huge numbers being infected, and we're seeing millions of people infected in many, many countries, if you have 20% or 10% of people who have severe illness and 2 to 3% of those people requiring really, really intensive treatment to survive it, then the numbers game beat you. You just don't have the beds to deal with it.
Is that what you're seeing? I know this is very broad, but is that what you're seeing, that about roughly 10% of people who get this end up having it severely enough to warrant going into hospital?
Yes, that's what we've seen overall. And the important thing also is getting there early. Yes.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you about one of the things that one of your colleagues has said, Dr. David Nabarro, who has said of national lockdowns, quotes, "You don't want to use those as your primary, and I stress that, primary means of containment, because in the end, living with the virus as a constant threat means maintaining the capacity to find people with the disease and isolating them." A lockdown has become our primary weapon, hasn't it?
I don't think so. I think there has been an attempt to try. I think there's been an attempt to try to do it locally. But what's missing in many, many countries is really getting the tracking and tracing right. And the biggest difficulty is that tracing and persuading people or assisting people to stay at home for the 14 days if they're a contact because they feel fine, they're not even sure that they've got the disease. So if it's not taken seriously and they're not given every support to stay at home, they don't. And that's where you get the infections rising.
What would you encourage the government here to do about our test and trace system in the 4 weeks plus, whatever comes after December the 2nd, that we've now got to put a lid on the spread of this virus? What would you encourage the government to do?
Really build your capacity, but also look at what you're telling people. Are you telling people to do things that are really actionable? Are you ensuring you've got enough people monitoring those who are isolating at home, whether they've got a positive coronavirus or whether they're a contact? Are you doing that every day? Are you making it possible for them to A, get tested, and B, stay at home and really stay at home? I mean, not even be in contact with household members.
How do you do that?
It's not easy.
Is there a place that has done that? Is there? I mean, have South Korea, they seem to have got a handle on all of this, or Taiwan? Have they been able to police that?
Quite a lot of the Asian countries have actually moved people out of their homes. So again, this is quite a big effort. Yeah, Hong Kong, in fact, put everybody who was positive in hospital. Now, the hospital capacity
you wouldn't want to see that here, or are you suggesting that maybe is something that the British government could consider?
You certainly should consider finding out about people's circumstances and making that option available. Because, if you've got people in a very crowded household or people who really are struggling to understand what's required or struggling to do it, they don't have the food, they don't have the money, then you have to make it possible. So this is about really
take people out of their homes, or at least encourage people to leave their homes to go to somewhere else where they can get either treatment or isolation.
Providing, and making that possible. So you don't want to be sort of rounding people up and bussing them out, but you do want to give them a genuinely doable option.
Okay. Dr. Harris, really good to talk to you. Margaret Harris, spokesperson for the World Health Organization. Well, that ain't happening, is it? I mean, there's absolutely no way there's surely no way that we'll get to a position come the start of December where the government will say, well, if you're in a multi-occupancy housing and you've got coronavirus, a transport will be laid on for you to drive you to a facility where you're going to spend the next 2 weeks isolating. 0345, what is going on? 0345 6060 973. Come to your calls in a few moments' time as well. Swarbrick on Sunday here, LBC, it's 11:33. News headlines. Here's Thomas Watts.
The Labour leader has told LBC that England's lockdown will last longer because of the delay in imposing it. Sir Keir Starmer says the government must now fix problems with test and trace before December. Pubs, restaurants, gyms and non-essential shops in England are due to close for 4 weeks from Thursday. A member of SAGE and a cabinet minister have already conceded the period of restrictions could be extended. And Transport for London says it's agreed a bailout deal to keep running rail and bus services until March. There won't be an extension to the congestion charge zone. Following reports, the measure was under consideration. And the weather, bright and mild for many, showers in parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and England later. Lighter rain in Scotland, a high of 16 Celsius.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
As the Prime Minister repeated at the press conference yesterday, the message is stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. We'll come on to the protect the NHS bit with the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation in just a few moments. Jürgen's in Balham this morning. Hi, Jürgen.
Morning, Tom. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm well, sir. Your thoughts on this new lockdown?
Well, I'm supportive of the lockdown element, but the furlough's just far too little too late. I mean, for me, I lost my job a couple of months ago as employers were planning for the end of the furlough period. Yeah. So, whilst in other European countries they've extended it until the new year, I think for hundreds of thousands, most likely, our jobs are already gone. And now trying to find a job against hundreds of people for every application is a pretty terrifying position to be in.
What did you do?
Recruitment manager for Europe and Asia for an American company. And now every job I go for, even more junior jobs, you look on it and there's 200 plus applicants every time.
And they let you go, Jürgen, because there was this expectation that the furlough scheme was going to end in October and therefore they couldn't support you in your job.
Correct.
Ouch. I wonder how, well, what would you say to the Chancellor if he were here?
Well, I feel like it's just a common thread. The government just can't seem to make the right decision early enough. They make a decision and then months later make a halfway decision going back in the opposite direction. I mean, I just wish once they'd get one of the big decisions right.
Jürgen, I'm really sorry. Thank you very much for your call. 0345 6060 973. 11:39. Danny Mortimer joins us, Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. Thank you very much for being there for us this morning, Mr. Mortimer. Your worries for the NHS were a lockdown not decided upon. And to what extent do you think that the delay in deciding on this has led to concerns about the NHS being overloaded?
So there's a few things there, Tom. I mean, clearly something has to be done to slow the rate of progressive infection and admissions, and clearly real harm that's coming to people. We've got 10 NHS hospitals now in the Midlands and in the North, where they're seeing admissions at the level the highest level they saw back in the spring. Yep. So we knew we faced these kind of three particular challenges. We knew we had to manage COVID. We want to keep non-COVID services going. We've also got to prepare for winter. So this step feels really important to help us with those things. It will also, and our NHS leaders are telling us this very clearly, it will hopefully also give the government a chance to get the test and trace system working properly. A lot in the Prime Minister's remarks last night about testing capacity increasing, but we need much quicker test results, and we need to track down a much higher percentage of contacts and isolate them.
The capacity that everybody helped the NHS build by locking down last time around, was enough capacity built into the NHS to deal with the possibility of a second wave?
So there's a few things there. I mean, I think the first is to say that we obviously did see the Nightingale hospitals commissioned. They're still there around the country, and we're getting ready to reopen them if needs be. The second thing is, of course, that our clinicians and our researchers do understand the disease far better now, and some of the treatments that we have available give us a much better prospect of saving lives, frankly, and reducing harm to people. So lessons have been learned there. I think we also gave the public very generously gave us some time to also expand the capacity level for non-patients. We carried on treating people during the height of the pandemic back in the spring, but we're better able to do more of that, albeit we will need some support and understanding from the public.
Just on
from the government in terms of the choices.
Just on the Nightingales, Mr. Mortimer, you talk about if needs be, the Nightingales are there. Is the need not here now? Are we not at the point where we say, right, well, hospitals are telling us they're going to be overrun. We're trying to put in a national lockdown before we've even opened the Nightingales. Why haven't we opened the Nightingales?
So the plans are being made to deploy the Nightingales. I think what was described last night by Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty was a real anticipation of a deterioration in the coming weeks. There are a number of the Nightingales who are being commissioned to open in the next week or two. Clearly different Nightingales in different parts of the country. Yeah, in the next couple of weeks.
Because based on the statistics that we just heard from the spokesperson for the World Health Organization, she said that around 10% of people have this illness with such severity that they will need to go into hospital. And yet, looking at the figures for England over the last few weeks, that just under 5% of people who have had this have ended up needing to go into hospital. And I know it's a question that comes with an awful lot of political baggage and a lot of emotional baggage, but actually, should the public not expect the NHS, having had the time to build the capacity, to be able to cope with just under 5% of people who get coronavirus coming in through their doors?
Tom, these are still significant numbers of very sick patients who stay in hospital for a significant length of time. What we're seeing across the country now is a rate of increase, particularly in those 10 institutions in the Midlands and North I talked about, but in a number of others as well. The NHS was never designed to cope with a pandemic like this. Clearly we are in a better place than we were in the spring, but we are also seeing rates of infections and rates of admissions in a number of institutions now at higher levels than we saw in the spring. So, we are absolutely desperate to make sure we will manage COVID patients, but also maintain services for patients who have other urgent healthcare needs, whether it's in cancer or mental health, whatever it may be.
Well, just on that point, I do want to give you...
This lockdown will help us do that, Tom.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because I just want you to make the point in the minute or so that we've got, actually. And I think this is really, really important to get across, for us to be able to get this across, that one of the crucial distinctions between this lockdown and the last one is that the Prime Minister is encouraging people to use the NHS in the same way.
Yes, and we are concerned that, for example, referrals for suspected cancers are much lower than we saw before the lockdown. They're still about 15% lower than we saw before the pandemic started. So what we are saying to people is that if you are worried that you have symptoms which might indicate cancer, then go and see your GP, contact your GP, and get that referral made to us, because we want to treat you. Because clearly, one of the impacts here that we also worry about is the longer term one. We see significant number of patients waiting far longer than we'd like for treatment. We see the impact of COVID on people's mental health, but also in terms of what we're now calling long COVID, a set of conditions and challenges that are affecting people for the longer term when they've had the virus. And what we do want to make sure is that those people who need care most urgently, so for example in cancer, that they do continue to come to their GP, they do continue to come through for specialist treatment.
Let's hope that the service is there to be able to help them as well. Danny Mortimer, thank you so much for your time. I wish you well. Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. Do you know, I read something yesterday in one of the papers that left me stunned. It was an interview with Jake Berry, who was a government minister, Conservative MP. His wife became incredibly unwell during the lockdown. She needed a keyhole operation to remove her gallbladder. And Jake Berry, in an interview to a newspaper, said that the doctor told his family that, but because of COVID, we aren't allowed to do elective operations, so we are going to keep you here until your liver function declines to such an extent that you are an emergency. And that process took a month. Mr. Berry said she was completely isolated from her newborn baby, in huge pain and on morphine. Finally, her liver crashed and it was a real emergency. She survived, but it compounded her postnatal depression. That is absolutely unreal, isn't it? To leave somebody in a position to where their condition has to deteriorate to become an emergency in order to then do the operation that would help get them out of that pain because of the pressures provided by coronavirus. We cannot be in that position again. And I totally take my multiple hats off to you if you're working in the NHS on the front line of this. You're doing something that I, thank God, will never have to do. But we cannot leave people in positions like that again. It cannot happen. 0345. So if it means opening up the Nightingales now, I know the one in Manchester has reopened for non-COVID related. Let's get them all open. Let's do it now, please. 0345 6060 973. Your call's in just a moment. Tom Swarbrick here, 11:46.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast, LBC.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, should you have done more when you were on the front bench working under Mr Corbyn? I challenged inside the Shadow Cabinet and outside. I thought it was important to have a voice inside and outside on that. Looking at the findings of yesterday, I've got to accept the responsibility that comes with those findings. Personally, do you feel you should have done more? I felt I did challenge at the time. I felt I challenged in the Shadow Cabinet. So there's no more you could have done at the time? Well, a number of us were challenging in the Shadow Cabinet. A number of us were challenging outside the Shadow Cabinet. We all need to reflect, of course, on that.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7. LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday, with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster.
Morning to you. We've heard this morning from the NHS, we've heard from the senior scientists, we've heard from the World Health Organization. After 12, I want to get some political reaction to what Boris Johnson said yesterday, the way in which it was said. There are some absolutely astonishing quotes from unnamed Conservative ministers and backbenchers about what they make of the way in which this is all being handled. We'll speak to two Conservative backbenchers after the news at midday. Gods and Iron has tweeted at Tom Swarbrick1. Tom, your incredulity at the thought of COVID-19 positive people being moved by government out of their homes to isolate indicates you're part of the problem. We need drastic action. We have empty hotels and idle coaches that the government could pay for. It'd be a win-win, says Gods and Iron. That was a suggestion put forward by the spokesperson from the World Health Organization. I honestly think, people are dealing with a lot. They're being asked to do an awful lot. The idea of being mandated that your wife or your brother or your husband or your sister is wrenched from the family unit and placed into a hotel some miles away because they're positive, COVID positive, I think you can file that in the box marked not on your Nelly. Here's Mark, new caller in Coventry this morning. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Tom.
Your thoughts, sir?
I'd call it on part of the £84 billion a year exhibition and event industry. We were closed down effectively in start of March. We've had no specific help for the industry at all in the last 7-8 months. Furlough doesn't really cut it with our industry because we're all, it's a lot of small companies without our own sick code, so we're not on that radar with the government.
What help have you had, Marks, thus far? What money have you had coming in from the state?
It's bounced back loans and a bit of furlough.
Right. And when you say a bit of furlough?
Some companies are lucky enough to have, to be small, but like us, we're a small family company. And we're all on the books. When I say on the books, we pay all our wages through PAYE. Right. A lot of directors don't do that.
So you are able to get the 80% furlough and some bounce back loan, which is obviously a loan. You'll have to pay it back at some stage.
Yeah. Personally, we're not too bad. We're probably the 1% of our industry that aren't doing that badly. We'll probably let it to next year, but we've already had about 130,000 job losses in the industry.
Well, this is it, Mark, and it was made by the point made by Jürgen a bit earlier, actually, saying that in the gap between us being told that furlough was going to end, something else being discussed, but now furlough restarting, in that period of time, people have lost their jobs because their companies have said, well, the furlough's ending, I'm really sorry, we can't keep you on. Mark, thank you, good luck. Here's Claire, another new caller to the show. Claire, you're in Basildon, hiya.
Hiya, how are you?
Yes, not too bad. Tell me how you are.
We're good. I mean, I think that if the general public aren't compliant, then we are never ever going to get on top of things. We have to learn to live with this. It's a pandemic. It's in our environment. But time and time again, I go to people and they're sitting in with their neighbours. They haven't got masks on. One of them thinks they've got COVID, and they thought they'd just call an ambulance just in case. And
you're a paramedic?
Yeah. And people just don't understand. And it's quite clear on the news, put a mask on, wash your hands. Constantly, the general public don't comply. And, we can blame government and we can blame many other people, but at the end of the day, if people aren't compliant, then we're never going to get on top of it.
Give me, Claire, the most egregious, the worst example that you have encountered of COVID non-compliance as a paramedic.
Where you've got groups of people, like maybe from 2 or 3 different families. I just popped over to see my mum. I think she's got it. No one's got a mask on. They're then going to go back home. There's someone else from the neighbours in as well. They haven't got a mask on. And, these are older people that, they're saying that they think they're COVID, but then you're going to go home and take it home to your families. And we know that it doesn't just affect the elderly; it does affect the young people as well. And people need to be responsible for their own actions.
So in a way, Claire, your suggestion seems to be based around the idea that we haven't actually felt the effects of a proper lockdown yet because people haven't been complying with one.
Well, I just feel like, some people think it won't happen to me. So if they haven't been affected by it, then it doesn't happen to me. So, you know what? I don't really need to worry about popping that mask on when I walk into Tesco's because, I haven't got it. No one I know's had it. But, you may be one of those people that doesn't show any symptoms of it and actually you've spread it to somebody else.
No, you're absolutely right to highlight there is a degree, and I think depending on where you are in the country, there may be quite a large degree of selfishness and narcissism that leads people to believe, it doesn't bother me, so I'll crack on as normal. Nobody is living life normally, as normal we knew before this all happened. Claire, I wish you well. Thank you very much for your call. Lots of you getting in touch regarding the Nightingales. My suggestion to the boss of the NHS Confederation that we maybe need to start getting the Nightingales open. Nikki says on 84850, Tom, our Nightingale has never been used in the North East from the first lockdown. It took them 6 months to decide whether or not we needed a Nightingale hospital. Lots of you getting in touch to say the issue is staffing. You'd love to have it open. It would be great to have it open, but you haven't got the staff there to actually be able to manage it or the cases that are coming through the door. That is a serious and pretty systemic problem, I'd have thought. Here's Robin in Southampton. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, no, I was just phoning up just to say that why aren't people issued with respirators, gas masks, like the dentists wear? I mean, they seem quite happy to work on people's teeth and mouths, with their respirators, and they're not huge. I mean, if you could wear that, you could go out in public, because it'd be, virtually virus-proof.
Give everybody a better mask. Is that the idea?
Well, the paper ones are probably not working, but if you wear a small respirator like the dentists use, and if it was issued to everybody that was elderly...
Yeah, when you say a respirator, you don't mean something that passes oxygen over your mouth?
No, just a gas mask. I'm not talking about something...
But without the gas?
Just a gas mask, like the dentists wear.
You mean a surgical mask?
No, I'm not surgical. It's a respirator. It's got filters on it. The dentists are using them now.
Right. So a better mask, a better quality mask than the masks that people wear generally might be advisable. I think we need to nail down the terms of what it is. But Robin, listen, thank you very much. All ideas welcome. Apart from the idea that you're going to take wife and children out of the home if they've got coronavirus, that seems absolutely nuts. We'll continue to take your calls. And after the news at midday, I want to turn to the political angle on this. There is, as the Mail on Sunday suggests this morning, absolute civil war, they call it, within the Conservative Party about how this is being handled. This is a Prime Minister who has said previously to a newspaper that he never thought we would need a lockdown again, rejected the call from Labour, and yet here we are. Where's Boris Johnson's credibility this morning?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 12 o'clock, Labour's leader has told LBC that ministers missed an opportunity to impose a more effective coronavirus lockdown in England. Hospitality businesses and many shops will have to close for 4 weeks from Thursday. Schools and universities will remain open. Sir Keir Starmer's told Swarbrick on Sunday the government must use the time wisely.
I really hope that it may be possible to come out of lockdown on that day. Nobody wants to be in lockdown. People are very fearful because of the virus itself and because of their jobs, but it will only be possible to come out of it if the government's got the virus under control, and that means that they've got to fix, test, trace and isolate. They've been in the last chance saloon on this for a very long time. They've got to deliver.
Local restrictions are due to be reintroduced at the end of the lockdown period on the 2nd of December, but there are suggestions the tougher controls could be imposed for longer if infection rates don't come down far enough. Sir Mark Walport is a member of SAGE and a former chief scientific advisor. He's told Swarbrick on Sunday on LBC that while difficult to predict, an extension may be required.
That is a possibility, and the government is going to have to look at the numbers very, very carefully indeed. It does come back to the capacity of the virus to reproduce itself, that sort of magic R number, which is the number of people on average that get infected by a person who has the infection.
The government's also facing criticism from some Conservative MPs concerned about the economic impact of the lockdown. Boris Johnson's insisted there's no alternative and has extended the furlough scheme for the duration of the new restrictions. But Finance Chief Baroness Helena Morrissey has told LBC it will still be devastating for many firms.
Massive collateral damage to the economy, to people's well-being as well as their livelihoods, other health issues that aren't being treated. And there is this sense of a sort of Alice in Wonderland, it'll be different this time. Business leaders are losing patience as well. Obviously, some sectors, aviation, hospitality, leisure, are completely decimated.
Ministers in Wales are meeting today to discuss the announcement in England. The 17-day firebreak lockdown there is due to end a week tomorrow. Scotland's First Minister has urged people to avoid all but essential travel to and from England. And just one more story. A 70-year-old man has been rescued from a collapsed building in Turkey some 34 hours after a strong earthquake in the Aegean Sea. At least 57 people died in the city of Izmir and on the Greek island of Samos. Search and rescue teams are continuing work in 9 buildings in the hope of finding more survivors. And the weather, a bright and mild afternoon for many. Showers returning later in Northern Ireland, Wales and parts of England. Lighter rain in Scotland, a high of 16 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, you're up to date.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Just gone 12. Very good afternoon to you. Tom Swarbrick here on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday, live with you this Sunday afternoon as we stride into Sunday afternoon. Hope we find you as well as can possibly be. Coming up on the show in the next 60 minutes, we'll speak to Rachel Riley, television presenter, broadcaster, who has faced massive abuse over the last few months after speaking out about anti-Semitism, particularly fierce in her criticism of the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. This is a week in which, you may have forgotten, given how quickly developments move on, but that Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended from the Labour Party this week following his response to that report, which suggested that the Labour Party had acted unlawfully in 3 different areas in dealing with cases of anti-Semitism. We'll speak to Rachel Riley a bit later on in the programme. I, of course, want to turn to what it is Boris Johnson said yesterday and the implications politically for what Boris Johnson did and said yesterday, and frankly the run-up to it. The front page of the Mail on Sunday: lockdown sparks Tory civil war. Boris Johnson last night plunged England into a month-long lockdown and his party into near civil war. Cabinet ministers and Tory MPs warned that the fresh restrictions coming into force on Thursday would devastate the already fragile economy, and they expressed fury that they only learned about the drastic measures through newspaper reports, concluding in the end in a leak inquiry that has meant that the government is looking for who gave the newspapers the information out of a meeting of 4 senior cabinet ministers on Saturday, which resulted in those headlines in the papers yesterday. As you know, in the run-up to this, the Prime Minister has been under pressure from the Labour leader to bring in a circuit breaker earlier. The Labour Party calling for a 2 or 3 week circuit breaker that would happen over half-term to try and allow us to catch up with the spread of the virus and develop the test and trace system. Boris Johnson rejected that. Only a few weeks ago, he was saying that that would be a disastrous thing, that it would effectively turn the lights off the country. He told a newspaper several months ago that he could not see a set of circumstances in which a national lockdown would be necessary. You might remember when in March, he talked about the tide could be turned in 12 weeks. In July, he said that there would be significant normality by Christmas. September, back to normal by Christmas was the line on the 9th of September. October the 23rd, some aspects of our lives will be back to normal by Christmas. Last night, a very different and better picture, he hoped, by spring. Just wonder whether all these all this language from Boris Johnson about here's what I hope for the future, here's what I believe is coming down the line, I fervently believe that by spring things will be better, I fervently believe we'll have a vaccine. It's lacking in credibility now, isn't it? No one believes the guy. 0345 6060 973. We'll speak to two Conservative MPs in just a moment. First, this is what the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said to LBC this morning. Take a listen.
Well, it's regrettable that the government has left it this late to bring in a lockdown. We called for a circuit break 3 weeks ago. The government rejected it, ridiculed it, only now to do the self-same thing. That means, I'm afraid, that the lockdown will be for longer because the infection rate has gone up in the last 3 weeks and we've missed the opportunity of half term when schools would actually have been shut. So what we now need to see from the government is the infection rate coming down to below 1, because otherwise the infections will keep going up. We also need to see the government using this period to fix, test, trace and isolate, because if you can't test quickly, you can't trace. If you can't trace, you can't isolate, and you will lose control of the virus, which is what has happened. So fix, test, trace and isolate. We've been promised a world-beating system for months on end. We don't need world-beating, we need effective, and we haven't got it.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking to LBC a little earlier this morning. Former Tory Cabinet Minister David Davis in the papers saying that a decision on a second national lockdown was probably even bigger than a decision to go to war, and it was essential that MPs were given a substantive vote on Wednesday with the chance to amend the motion. Let's speak to Robert Halfon, Chair of the Education Select Committee, Conservative MP for Harlow. Thank you for coming on the programme this morning, Mr Halfon. Which way are you going to be voting on Wednesday, and do you think it is going to be a substantive vote?
Well, very sadly, I will be voting for the motion for the restrictions over the coming month, not because I want to, but because of the data presented by the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Science Officer yesterday, warning of the huge rise of COVID, warning of the difficulties that our NHS will face. And I don't think I have any alternative, not being an epidemiologist or a scientist, but to follow the advice of the Chief Science Officer and Chief Medical Officer of our country.
Why do you think the government have alighted upon December the 4th as a way out of this? As a date out of this?
I think that that is probably what the Chief Medical Officer has advised. We'll find out more tomorrow in Parliament when the Prime Minister makes his statement. There'll be further details also coming out over the next few days. No one wants this. I was a supporter of the the so-called tier traffic light system. I thought that was an option, but it clearly
hasn't worked, has it?
No, but don't forget the government are walking a tightrope between the health of our individual citizens and the health of our economy, and they tried the tier system to try and suppress the virus.
They did try it. You're right, and yeah, it hasn't worked. I mean, this is the announcement of a lockdown is an indication, is it not, that everything that the government has tried to control the virus since we came out of the last lockdown has failed?
Well, if you look at what's going on, it's not just in England that this has happened. If you look at Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, they also had traffic light systems in terms of tier systems or regional variations or curfews or whatever it may be, but they've also started to impose national lockdowns because across Europe, the virus has been much worse than people thought would happen. And so this isn't something sadly unique to the United Kingdom. It's happening across Europe.
But
and only a few weeks ago,
Sorry to interrupt, Robert. We're going to talk all over each other at this rate because of, I think, the internet connections. It tends to be the way of the world at the moment that we can't do anything in person at the moment. But and I got the date wrong. My fault. It's December the 2nd that these measures run to. Why bother having a date? Why not say until we get R below 1, that's how long we'll be in lockdown for? Because as we've heard, even this morning, government ministers and members of SAGE telling this programme that they can't commit to coming out on December 2nd if the R is still above 1.
As I say, I'm not privy to the internal discussions of the Chief Medical Officer and the government, but this is what has been advised, that if we do this
But you are voting for an unending lockdown here.
Well, I'm voting for a lockdown for the next month, and the government will review it in early December.
Just let me bring you one of the words of an unnamed one of your colleagues, a senior Conservative MP and former minister, speaking to one of the papers this morning about the Prime Minister, quoted as saying, the Prime Minister, he's on borrowed time, totally inept. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't agree with that at all. I think we're in a national pandemic, a national emergency. We've never had to face this kind of thing before. Everything the government does isn't the best option. It's the least worst option. I think the Prime Minister, in terms of the COVID, is facing a very difficult situation, is trying to, as I say, walk that tightrope between the nation's economy and the nation's health. And it is not an easy tightrope to walk. And it is easy for people sitting at, certain people, armchair critics, to say X and Y, the decision is wrong. But this is, as I say, a repeat, this is not just happening in the United Kingdom, it's happening across Western Europe. Every major government in every major European country is facing a similar problem.
Okay. Robert, thank you for your time. Robert Halfon, Chair of the Education Select Committee, Conservative MP for Harlow. Listening to that is Chris Green, Conservative MP for Bolton West. Thank you for coming on the programme, Chris. What are you going to do on Wednesday?
I'm not 100% certain, but I'm expecting to be voting against the government for this second lockdown. In Greater Manchester and Bolton, we've been through quite a difficult time. And I think with this national lockdown, Bolton will be in its fourth variant of lockdown in about 2 or so weeks.
What is going to persuade you to vote for the government if at the moment you're considering voting against?
Well, I think the key thing in this, and it's been a key thing right from the beginning, is evidence, it's data. What is the evidence to back up the government's projections? All we saw yesterday on these slides was not data. We saw projections of the future, a speculation on the future. And we saw quite recently Sir Patrick Vallance, he had his graph. And that graph showed the daily positive tests, actual positive tests on a daily basis. And by mid-October, we should have been plus 50,000 per day. We've actually been stable at about plus 22,000 per day for the last week or even 10
Wasn't
days.
That based on no measures being taken?
No, Patrick Vlance's was a projection of the future. That was an expectation of what's going to be happening. And actually today, probably we'd be on about 200,000 positive tests per day. We're about 1/10 of that. But
so you think that
this does come down to the government actually releasing the data. We've got these projections, release the data, let smart epidemiologists and other people challenge that data, scrutinise it, and if they all universally say, you know what, the government's right, then I might vote with the government. But if they don't release the data, we've got to ask that question, why not?
What's the alternative if the tier systems that you have been living under in Bolton don't work, which they don't work, and the government has almost but admitted that in bringing in this lockdown?
Well, that's not quite correct, because the government would assert that Tier 3 is already working in Liverpool. That's what the government claims at the moment. Tier 3 is working in Liverpool, and the government would claim if only Andy Burnham had have accepted Tier 3 in Greater Manchester, we would already have seen the position improve in Greater Manchester. That's the government position. Mm-hmm. The government isn't even giving enough time for its own tiered strategy to work. And when people say it's following the science, well, when the government introduced Tier 1, 2 and 3, Chris Whitty was saying these won't be enough. At that time, the science and SAGE were saying this won't be enough. So if the government was following the science, they seem to be doing it in a very erratic way.
Well, and the scientists, at least those on SAGE, suggested in September that a national lockdown would be required. Why do you think the government didn't listen then?
I've no idea. I do think it's extraordinary. We hear this is all science-based policy, and yet we don't have the scientific thresholds to say you move from Tier 1 to 2 to 3. We don't have the scientific thresholds to say you're leaving these tiers. We don't even have a scientific basis announced to say this national lockdown that all of these MPs are going to be voting on in a few days' time, the scientific basis for coming out of that national lockdown is... They refuse even to say R has to be going downwards below 1. They refuse even to give that as a very clear guidance.
Well, if that was, I mean, that's, again, speaking to a member of SAGE this morning on the programme, he did suggest that coming below 1 is where we need to be.
But the government isn't in that position.
Well, I don't understand why you would then just give it a time frame. Why would you say we'll end on December the 2nd when you don't know whether R will be down below 1? You hope it will, but once you reach December the 2nd, you make a decision about, well, we'll have to extend for another few weeks, which causes chaos for people.
Well, what I was doing was describing the government's position.
Yeah.
The scientists would say R's got to be below 1. The government is saying they're not even giving an indication whether they agree with that or not. They're leaving it completely open for a decision to be made on the 2nd of December. So it's not that we're in or out of the national lockdown on the 2nd. A decision will be made at that point, which may come into effect days, perhaps a week later.
Do you think politics played a part in Boris Johnson ignoring Sir Keir Starmer's suggestion of a circuit breaker for 2 or 3 weeks over half term?
The most logical thing to do would be to have the circuit breaker at half term, and perhaps even have a 2-week half term rather than 1 week, because that would follow the logic of minimising social contact and therefore minimising transmission. So I think it's odd. I would love the Prime Minister to actually say what those conversations behind closed doors were, but I could only speculate.
So it was political.
And I think it's my speculation against
from the outside. Yeah, from the outside though, Chris, it does seem like the government was backed into a corner by Sir Keir Starmer. They took Sir Keir Starmer to task. They said this isn't necessary, this is turning the lights off, and they have done the same thing. So in order to avoid the embarrassment of a U-turn earlier, they took a political calculation that it was worth ploughing on with the Tier 3 and the Tier 2 restrictions, even though they might not have been working. It was politics.
Well, I think the Prime Minister decided about a month ago to go for a national circuit breaker. That's when that language first emerged. And it was at that time suggested the half term would be the right time. So I don't understand why the Prime Minister didn't just agree with Keir Starmer and say, you know what, you're right. The scientists, or at least certain scientists, are saying this is the route we've got to follow. Let's follow that route and have cross-party unity. I don't know why they didn't do that, but it causes more confusion. And you think of businesses, you think of people's health. This confusion actually, I think, will deter people from going to see their GP, deter people from going to hospital. It's causing huge problems.
Just finally, and I realise this is testing loyalty, but based on what we saw yesterday and the lead up to it and everything you've just described, can you honestly suggest to your constituents and to my listeners that Boris Johnson is doing a good job of managing us through this crisis?
Well, I resigned because I disagreed with the approach the government's taking. So I wish they would change their approach. And obviously, I'm on the record as having said that. But we do have to look forward to a time post-COVID, or a time when we're decided that we've got to live with it because it's now endemic in society. And there are a whole host of other things. Brexit in the short term, the bounce back in the economy is another part, because ultimately that's going to fund our education, our health service and everything else. So I think we've got to back Boris to deliver on these wider ideas and concerns.
Chris Green, I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you for coming on the programme. Conservative MP for Bolton West, as you heard, not quite, and I don't think he's, by the sound of it, I'm not sure Mr Green is going to be persuaded to vote for the government, but we'll see when that vote rolls around on Wednesday. 0345 6060 973. If you were able to have a vote in the House of Commons on these lockdown measures, would you go for it? Come to your calls in a few moments. Tom Swarbrick, 1219.
This is LBC. This is LBC, Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
I think we all of us agree that this is incredibly difficult to manage for the government, that these circumstances are not one that you would ever predict or wish to find yourself in, given everything we're going through, and that public support at the start of this was very high for the government. That support has waned quite considerably throughout all of this, but I do think there is still a residue of sympathy at the challenge that faces this government. But to my mind, the way Boris Johnson has handled this has been to try and project certainty when it's not in his gift to project that certainty, because that certainty doesn't exist. You don't have to go back very far to find moments where Boris Johnson has said, we'll turn the corner in 12 weeks. Christmas there will be normality at Christmas time, that test and trace is going to be world beating, that no, we don't need another lockdown because that would be turning the lights off. And at every stage, he has seemed to, because of the circumstances that he's found himself in, have to go back on that. So why couch yourself in that certainty? Why nail your feet to the floor by saying, no, absolutely not, we won't be doing that, when you've got no idea? Because we're all trying to work out what's going on here. The government is only perhaps one page ahead in the book than everybody else, and I guess some of you might suggest they're one page behind. Why allow yourself to be painted into a corner where you have to make a U-turn because the stated position has been, no, we're not going to do national lockdowns, that allows a huge political win for Sir Keir Starmer and makes Sir Keir Starmer look far more in control of what he wants to do than the Prime Minister does. And last night, again, sorry to go off on this, I promise I'll come to Adam in just a moment, but the thing that got it for me last night was, I was sitting there watching the press conference and I thought, okay, the single thing that they need to communicate is how this press conference, this lockdown, is different to the last lockdown. And it's different because schools are going to be open and the Prime Minister wants you to use the NHS. That is really critical because of all the problems that the last lockdown stored up with people not using the NHS. And almost literally the next sentence, the Prime Minister said, so the message is, stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. Literally the same slogan as the last lockdown. So what are you left thinking? Is this the same as the last one? Do I go to the NHS? Am I here to stay at home to protect the NHS, to save lives? What is it that they are trying to communicate? And I think it has been lost, possibly during the stress and the difficulties of all of this, that I do not underestimate for one moment. It's very difficult. But this morning, the credibility is just shot to pieces. Here's Adam in Canterbury. Sorry you had to wait, Adam. Hiya.
Hiya. I just really wanted to kind of add my voice here. I totally agree with what you said. I'm a secondary school teacher. The uncertainty that the government has projected at the moment has been really unhelpful. I think my primary job as a teacher is to be that certainty for my students so that when they walk into my classroom, they know that I'm there every day. I think the risk of the government at the moment flip-flopping all around, it really undermines that. I really want to kind of add my voice to other teachers that have called in. On the whole, the profession, we want to keep our schools open. I've seen the impact of the virus on the mental health of my students. And I think my place at school right now hasn't been more important.
Well, Adam, I personally, I'm delighted to hear that because I want my kids to be able to go to school and I want school. And that, as you say, actually, that certainty that schools provide for the kids at the moment is really important. When it comes to how the government is dealing with this, do you think it is plausible for the government to have said at various points during this, say, for instance, when Keir Starmer asked for another lockdown, do you think it would have been accepted by us, the public, if the government has said, do you know what? Maybe we might have to. We're not sure yet. We're hoping the tier system works, but we keep our options open.
Well, I feel like they've missed the boat. It's a Sunday now. I'm now at the end of my half term. We could have had that lockdown now. It wouldn't have had an impact on education. I just feel like the government has been reacting. They haven't been leading from the front. And you know, I don't want to voice my politics here. But it just feels like if there is uncertainty at the top level of our government, then that filters through. And ultimately, my responsibility is my kids. And they are uncertain and they are unsure. Are they sitting their GCSEs? My kids have got exams next week.
Yeah, and look,
should
Adam,
they be trying?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I take my hat off to you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for continuing to do it. I just guess that the issue of certainty is a difficult one because the times are so uncertain right now. The way the virus is moving is so uncertain. All that uncertainty is adding up. But again, then it comes back to the point that I was making earlier about why nail your feet to the floor on a particular policy when there is so much uncertainty. Morris is a new caller in Golders Green. Hiya, Morris.
Hi, yes.
Hello, sir.
Now, quickly, I'm during the lockdown. I'll be 96. I'm a veteran from World War II. I served 4 years in the British Army. As soon as I heard there was going to be a lockdown, I said to the person next to me, "I've committed no offence, but I'm now a prisoner. I can't see my family can't see me. In other words, in my lifetime, we've never had martial law. That's what we've got now, a dictatorship of martial law. If you're outside at 10 o'clock and you happen to bump into some friends, 6 in number, and you dare to sort of go over and join them, you can be arrested.
Well, I guess, Morris,
also, our Prime Minister is wrecking the economy. I've never known anything like it in my whole life.
Listen, sir,
how I voted for him, I'll never know.
I wonder if Morris, just very, very briefly, do you feel that those freedoms that you and your peers fought for are at risk?
Yes, I do. I feel my freedom is taken away, absolutely. And
well, sir, I'm so sorry to hear that, and thank you very much for your service over those years. I'm just sorry to hear that you and many other people find themselves in the position that they can't see their loved ones and their family at the moment. Thank you very much for your call. 0345 6060 973 is my number. We'll be joined by the broadcaster TV presenter Rachel Riley to talk about the anti-Semitism within the Labour Party in just a few moments. 12:30 is the time news headlines. Here's Tim Humphrey.
Politicians and scientists have told LBC England's new coronavirus lockdown could last longer than the expected 4 weeks. There's criticism the government has left it too late to adopt the measures to cut infection rates across the country. Non-essential shops will be ordered to close for 4 weeks from Thursday, and there will be a ban on households mixing. But schools, universities and childcare facilities will stay open. The CBI, which represents 200,000 businesses, says the new restrictions are a real body blow, but its Director General is welcoming the decision to continue the job furlough scheme through November. The weather, rain returning to much of Northern Ireland, Wales and England. Scotland will be brighter, severe gales in the northwest and a high of 16.
This is LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Afternoon to you, 12:34 is the time. It's a story that would have been, I think, discussed a heck of a lot more, not only on the programme, but in the papers too. The story of the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party, given the report by the EHRC on anti-Semitism whilst he was Labour leader, and the ways in which that the Labour Party, according to that report, act unlawfully in dealing with those claims of anti-Semitism. One person who has been speaking about anti-Semitism and has been very, very strong in her opinions about the Labour leader and his opinion on anti-Semitism is Rachel Riley, the TV presenter who has faced a lot of online abuse after speaking out about anti-Semitism. And when it was that Jeremy Corbyn was suspended, Rachel, you tweeted, "You are one anti-Semite too many, leave us alone." Thank you for coming on the programme. Why do you think Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic?
By his actions, his words, people he shares platforms with, by how, the EHRC report has now vindicated that there was an unlawful discrimination and harassment case to be made against the Labour Party. They've issued their first ever unlawful act order, and it was an uncomfortable, horrible place for Jewish members to be in.
Do you think, though, that proves his anti-Semitism? I mean, people can't see...
we're past this. We are absolutely past this debate. We don't even need to go there. 87% of the Jewish community believe that Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. But at this stage, the EHRC report established that when he was reported for anti-Semitism, this in particular, they looked at 70 test cases, and the one they found was the mural. And the leader of the opposition's office decided not to investigate. There was political interference. We were repeatedly told by Jeremy Corbyn and their office that they didn't interfere politically with complaints about anti-Semitism. And there's proof in this independent body's report. He wasn't suspended for anti-Semitism. What the report said was that saying that smears and that the Jewish people were smearing and lying about reports of anti-Semitism constitutes unlawful harassment of Jewish people. Keir Starmer spoke to Jeremy Corbyn the day before the report was released, told him what was going to be in his speech, that said anyone that still repeats this smear rhetoric is part of the problem. And a few minutes before Keir Starmer went and made that speech, Jeremy Corbyn said just that. He knew exactly what was going to happen. I think he's trying to make himself a martyr. But this shouldn't be about Jeremy Corbyn anymore. This should be about vindication of Jewish people who have suffered great racism over the last 5 years and more, and extreme pain. And this is vindication. Yeah. And this should be start of the healing process.
Well, I just wonder the impact on you, Rachel, as someone that is Jewish and has had an awful lot of abuse when you're speaking out about anti-Semitism. When you read the findings of the report, when you saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, would pleased be the wrong emotion or the wrong description of the emotion that you felt?
It's vindication because, I think, as well as the anti-Semitism, one of the most painful things has been the denialism. And how it's, there's always the balance. So you have 87% of Jews who think Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. You have an EHRC report, which is a legal body that's been, challenged by both sides, that's come out with this report that says, yes, the Labour Party has acted unlawfully. And then you still have the balance. You have the outriders. You have the Corbyn supporters who are unwilling to accept this. And it's painful. It's visceral. It's ruined people's lives. It's ruined people's careers. It's deeply, deeply painful to a community that, in recent memory, in our grandparents' lifetimes, we were tried to be eradicated. And now we see exactly the same type of anti-Semitism that you would expect from the far right, coming from the far left, without any awareness of what's going on. So there needs to be a lot of education, and we need to stop the rhetoric about smearing because it's been proven to be untrue.
I'm not sure where you are on the political spectrum, Rachel. You might not want to give that away, but I wonder whether you would see yourself perhaps joining the Labour Party or voting for the Labour Party if Jeremy Corbyn were not allowed back into it.
I'm a centrist, so I'm a swing voter. I've never been part of a political party. I don't intend to now because I change my opinions based on information and based on the people that are in charge at that time. And, even just a couple of years ago, our politics was dominated by Brexit, which split, the red-blue divide in any way. And at the last election, I voted for Chuka Umunna. There's a lot of work to be done with the Labour Party now. The campaign for anti-Semitism, on the back of the EHRC report, they have reported Jeremy Corbyn, they reported Diane Abbott and 14 other MPs for anti-Semitism, which, a lot of these things were overlooked, were ignored, were politically dismissed. I think the EHRC report came back with the 70 case studies. Over 30% of those were interfered with by the leader of the opposition's office. So thankfully, this report is a legally binding document. The Labour Party are legally obliged to act, and they have to introduce an independent body to oversee complaints. But there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to build up trust. And at every election, I look at who's there to vote for, what they stand for, and I vote based on that. So.
And just very finally, I wonder if you think the anti-Semitism that was coming from sometimes members of the Labour Party or supporters of the Labour Party, does that reflect, in your experience, a growth in anti-Semitism across the country, or do you think that this is an issue that was confined clearly very strongly to parts of the left in the Labour Party?
I mean, it's not solely the Labour Party by any stretch. I mean, social media has a huge part to play, and a lot of what my campaigning is, doing now is trying to force the social media companies to actually step up and do this. But what we saw was when Jeremy Corbyn was elected, and there were two challenges to his leadership, places where anti-Semitism, Holocaust and all, but the top level of anti-Semitism was rife. They were places where they were saying, join the Labour Party, vote for Jeremy Corbyn. They actively encouraged anti-Semites into the party, and they groomed people who, thought they were supporting progressive causes into sharing anti-Semitic tropes and believing a load of absolute nonsense. So, it is a problem in wider society, but the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, unfortunately, became a place that accepted it and became a welcoming place for anti-Semites and didn't do enough to show that it wasn't acceptable. So, that's how I see it.
We wish you well with your campaigning. Rachel Riley, thank you very much indeed for your time on the show this morning. Rachel Riley, TV presenter, who has faced an awful lot of online abuse as a result of speaking out against the anti-Semitism that she saw in the Labour Party. I think, there will be fallout from what Jeremy Corbyn has said in response to that report, which the Labour Party itself is going to have to deal with, given there is a challenge to his suspension right now. Let's come to your calls. Here's Owen in Cambridge. Hi, Owen.
Hi, Tom. Long
Hello,
time
sir.
listener, first time caller.
Oh, great, man. We've got you in the tractor beam now. You're caught there forever, Owen, I'm afraid.
Exactly. Listen, Tom, I'm not sure if I'm missing something here, but right now we seem to be paying a lot of well people to stay at home, when what we should be doing is paying infected people to stay at home. 90% of the people I speak to are scared to take a test in case it's found positive, but they can't afford to stay off work. It's a bit like in the 80s, when you throw a lot of money at a lot of people. When they went for the sport fraud programme, they threw a lot of money at a lot of people and got nothing. And then they realised that they throw a lot of money at a few people, they got something. And it's the same thing here. I think we should all be tested. The positive
We don't have the capacity. We don't have the.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem, Owen. Is we don't have the capacity to. Oh, by the way, just while I've got you, Owen, on the Prime Minister and deadlines. Today was the deadline for his claim that he was going to be able to test 500,000 people a day. It's not happened.
No. Yeah. I mean, that's what they've got to work towards. There's no point in us having a lockdown and coming out and doing the same thing. Because that's what madness is, isn't it, right? Okay, we've got to come out there and do something different. And for me, it's about making the positive people, the infected people, stay at home. And a lot of the people I speak to are scared to do it because they can't afford the time off work.
Yeah. And I think that's going particularly self-employed. Owen, thank you for the call. Make sure you call me again. Here's Anthony in Glasgow. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Tom.
Hello, sir.
Just to pick up a point that you had said about just opening up the Nightingale hospitals. The Nightingale hospitals were planned initially never to be used. So we are opening up the emergency book within the NHS plans. These were never intended to be used. The staff, where are we getting the staff from? Before the pandemic, the Royal College of Nursing had said to previous Prime Ministers that there were 40,000 registered nurses short. That's just to run day to day. We're now out with business as usual. And it was reported that the Nightingale Hospital in London would require 16,000 staff just to run it. Where are we getting the staff? We've already got nurses that are stretched, trying to run emergency services as well as trying to tick over routine operations, but there has to come a point where we either burn out as a profession. I'm a nurse as well. We either burn out as a profession, and one to bring up, a point to pick up from your previous members of Parliament who you interviewed today, they were balancing between the health of the economy and the health of the nation. Well, you will not have an economy if you don't have the health of the nation. The health of the nation has to come first. Without it, you have no economy.
You're absolutely right. But in order to keep the health of the nation strong, you are, I think, as we're seeing through this pandemic, going to have to pay for it. There's no way you can just allow people to self-isolate with no financial support. And that's the balance that the government has got to manage, I guess. Hey, Anthony, thank you very much indeed. 0345 6060 973. I come back, Anthony's point actually reminded me again of that bit in the Sunday Telegraph's leader about it being, they call it, an absolute humiliation. Not mincing their words, an absolute humiliation for supposedly successful countries such as the UK, France or Germany to have to admit it, but the bureaucracy can still only find one tool it thinks will make a real difference, the biggest, bluntest instrument of all, another dreadful lockdown. We've got nothing else. In all the preparing for a pandemic, in all the reviews of NHS capacity, in all the exercises that were undertaken, what actually happened to build up the capacity that we now know, because we're in one, is necessary to try and keep the country moving and to keep as many people safe as possible? 0345 6060 973. After the break, we will be live to Washington, D.C. Our senior Westminster correspondent, Ben Kentish, has traded one political maelstrom for another and is now taking a part player in the rolling tragicomedy that is the United States of America. We'll join Ben Kentish in Washington, D.C. in just a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 1246.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Majid Nawaz.
Michael Gover's brief pressed that England's 4-week national lockdown could be extended beyond December the 2nd. Join us to analyse what's going on, what the rules are and what an exit strategy could look like.
Majid Nawaz on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday with Tom Swarbrick, live from Westminster on LBC.
To your calls in just a sec. If you are a dyed-in-the-wool, true blue Conservative voter, I wonder how you are waking up this morning and thinking about your Prime Minister, whether or not he's doing a good job, whether he's doing enough of a good job to mean that you will be voting for him again at some stage in the future. Come back to your calls on that in just a moment. There is a big vote taking place on Tuesday night. You can hear the US election show special on LBC. Me and my colleagues Ian Dale, Sheila Fogarty, taking you through the night with the results as they come in, hopefully as they come in that night, from across the United States to see who it is who is going to be leading that country over the course of the next 4 years. Ben Kentish is LBC's Westminster correspondent, but has traded a deep and dark Westminster for it looks a pretty gloomy Washington, D.C. Ben, thank you for joining us this morning. Tell us how we are 2 days out.
Tom, everybody here is saying the same thing. They are nervous. There is anticipation. And I must say, most people we've spoken to, there's a degree of fear. Because when you say to people, what do you want to happen on Tuesday, Tom, they don't say Joe Biden or Donald Trump, first of all. They say they want a peaceful election. And near here, just a few roads away, many, many shops have been boarded up because there are fears that whatever way that election goes, there could be disruption, there could be riots. But as it gets ever closer, Joe Biden's supporters are, we've spoken to, of course, optimistic based on a poll lead that seems to be standing up both nationally and in key states. But they are burned by what happened in 2016. So it's a very, very cautious optimism. And on the other hand, Donald Trump supporters saw how wrong the polls were last time and are still confident that he could mount what would be an even bigger upset than last time around. So suspense is building absolutely here. Even now, people are starting to gather at the White House. But I say it is tinged with a very real element of concern and even fear about what could happen afterwards.
I see a coach going past you as you stand in Washington, D.C. outside the White House there, Ben. And it takes me to this incident that we saw the president retweeting last night, his supporters basically chasing after Joe Biden's coach as it went through Texas.
Yes, we did. And that was exactly the sort of incident that has fueled those concerns. There's also been, of course, reports of plots to capture the governor of Michigan, for example, in order to start a civil war, militias walking the streets. And Tom, people you speak to here make very clear that this is an extraordinary election. They don't remember, people, elderly voters, do not remember anything like this happening in recent living memory. So, yes, that was another incident that will really fuel these concerns. In front of me, there's lots of police, security presence being mounted already. Of course, we're still 2 days away, but those concerns growing pretty quickly at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be 2 days out from this. I don't think we're going to have a definitive answer. Ben, thank you. You might be in Washington for some time to come. LBC's Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish live for us in Washington, D.C. LBC's US election special underway on Tuesday night. Don't miss a cough, kick or splutter of it. Richard's in Bristol. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Tom. I'm agreeing with just about everything you say. The only thing
How dull.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
I want you to explain something to me. I think all these half-hearted lockdowns have just missed the target. Getting students back to university, keeping schools open, allows the virus to spread. There's a cost to whatever we do, whether it's a tight lockdown or one like that. But if we don't do a proper shutdown, it's going to be longer and it's going to keep recurring. So I think if we had a proper lockdown, absolute proper lockdown, we'd get on top of the virus, the numbers would go down, it would be easier to control. So I don't understand people like commentators like you saying, the schools have got to stay open, because however you relax it, that is going to increase the transmission of the virus, isn't it?
Yeah, listen, Richard, I think I can completely see your point. The difficulty for me, though, is the lockdown's effect is to just squish the virus down. It doesn't eradicate it, it doesn't move it anywhere, it just squishes the number of people who are able to catch this thing further down. I don't know that a sustainable life a country that can carry on sustainably is one that rolls from one lockdown to another. A constant stream of, well, we'll come out of it for a bit, but then within 3 weeks we're all back in. Then we'll come out of it for a bit. I'm not sure that is sustainable. So at some point we're going to have to try and find ways of living with this sensibly and carefully. That means that hospitals aren't overloaded. We don't have to build mortuaries and ice rinks or any of the terrible things that are being discussed at the moment. And I do think that one of the ways we have to find to live with this is to keep schools open, because there is a moral imperative to make sure that kids get an education through this.
I don't understand, because if it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked, and this guy, Boris, doesn't seem to learn by his mistakes, we're going to keep having more and more shutdowns.
But schools were shut down last time. Schools were shut down last time, and we're back here again.
Yeah, but then we've had to go out to eat out. University students, have you seen how? I'm not blaming them, and I'm not using them as. I'm not criticising them. I think they shouldn't have gone back to university. They were bound to spread the virus. They go out, they party, they live in tiny, cramped accommodation. How on earth did anyone think that wasn't going to spread the virus?
Well, listen, Richard, I think that is a perfectly good point about, was it actually sensible to get students into halls of residence immediately after the lockdown was lifted at the start of the new academic term? I think that's a perfectly legitimate question. Maybe we can't actually live with the virus spreading in that way. I think there is a different matter about schools, given how much more COVID secure schools are. And we've heard from teachers throughout the programme who say, do you know what? I feel safe. Let's keep going. Thank you for your call. Stuart's a new caller, another one on the show in Newcastle. Hi, Stuart.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
No worries, sir. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so it seems the announcement yesterday really went against some of the data that national stakeholders within sport and leisure have been sharing with the government. For instance, amongst the sectors that reopened from July, gyms and indoor leisure centres were actually the safest. The spread within those facilities was far lower than in supermarkets, in retail, in restaurants. So for those facilities to be included in this lockdown, it completely goes against what information has been provided. And if the government are serious about saving the NHS, maintaining physical health, maintaining mental health, then they really need those key facilities to stay open so people can exercise during winter when it's colder, darker and less safe to do so outside.
You make a compelling case for keeping gyms open, Stuart. I guess the difficulty that the government has is in instituting a lockdown, they have to trade some areas as being less important than others for the health and wealth of a nation, and maybe the decision definitely is, that gyms do not form part of that.
Exactly. It seems to be that view, but if we're going to save the NHS, if we're going to offset the public health damage that COVID has caused, we need spaces and places to do that. And as the nights draw in, there aren't the same spaces outdoors as there were 4 months ago. So I really think there's a short-sightedness to...
Yeah. And just quickly, Stuart, are you a gym bunny or do you work in a gym?
I'm not a gym bunny. I do use gyms, but I'm actually researching leisure management. So it's I'm really on the heartbeat of this, and that's why I'm keen to really spread the message that we need gyms open, we need leisure centres open, and the government really needs to listen and to take heed of the data that national partners share.
Listen, Stuart, thank you very much indeed for your call. Thank you very much to all of you for your calls, texts, tweets and emails throughout the course of the programme this morning and this afternoon. You can catch me Monday nights, 10 p.m, Monday to Thursday, 10 p.m. here on LBC. Swarbrick on Sunday, back with you next Sunday at 10 a.m. Coming up at 4, Ian Payne, right now, here on LBC. Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Tom. Well, we're all going into another national lockdown, and this time we learn in the morning that it will be enforced stricter than the one that was in earlier in the year, but also it may well extend beyond December the 2nd, as we've heard this morning from Michael Gove. He says that scientists are saying that this may well last longer as well as be stricter. The Prime Minister said the restrictions that start on Thursday would last 4 weeks, but then they would be